Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 181. On the way. Seth thought for a moment. I actually know two lovely ladies who have a lot of free time, he said with a smirk. The party had met Mary and Jane before, and after Seth explained to Tecker who he was talking about and where his daughter would stay in the meantime, he readily agreed. Having solved this issue, they arranged to meet tomorrow in the church. They would set off for a Ruggieri at noon. Mark Baker sat in his new office on the higher floors of the Hunter Association. He had been promoted to Y-City after the successful acquisition of the auction house access. He was sifting through the reports from the division he was supervising. The Keep, the Gourmet Hunter, and a wizard. Just what is he up to? Mark was not stupid. He had already suspected something when Seth gave away the mobile access so easily. It was a great relief when the device really worked, and it brought him a lot of benefits. His suspicions grew when he saw the prices of the items in the auction house. When Seth immediately entered the church and soon after the church started item auction, he felt confirmed. Seth still had more of these devices or had another way to get items. After his promotion, he had appointed people to shadow him and see what he was doing. Lately, he had been meeting with a group of people who started to frequent the church. Especially after he ran into Squad 1 and revealed a strong pet, Mark's interest had grown. What do we have on these three people? He asked his subordinate standing at the side. Yes sir. We know the most about Link Lightning, the Gourmet Hunter. We also know a little about Tecker Jackson. There is no information on the wizard Allison Orkney, except for her being a strong wizard, the subordinate recounted. Okay, let's start with Link the Gourmet Hunter. Yes, sir. He was a small-time criminal known for theft and drug dealing. After he gained the unique class Gourmet Hunter, he took part in the logistics troops of several expeditions during the war. The class is supposedly a mix of hunter and chef. It lacks the damage multiplier of a hunter class, but there is an increased chance to make food with permanent improvements when cooking self-hunted prey. Supposedly he also has the ability to gain skills from the food. Is this information reliable? Baker inquired. Yes. It's mostly based on what Lightning himself said when he was either drunk or promoting his skills. If only everyone was this open with their special classes. His job would have been a lot easier. A hunter class that lowered the damage in exchange for gaining abilities from hunting, cooking, and eating prey. Sir. Ah, yes. Keep going. Yes. Tecker Jackson, leave 34. He worked as a construction worker before the apocalypse. His wife died during the first invasion. He lives with his daughter. His class is the Keep, like the most fortified tower and last stand of a castle. We know little about his class, and most is deduced from his performance in battle and the testimonies of witnesses, rather than confirmed by any specific source. The class has no typical tank skills that allow for the control of monster aggro or the active shielding of allies. In exchange, his defense seems to be double or more than that of normal tanks, and we assume that he might have a basic resistance against most or all status ailments. And the wizard? Nothing. Except for the fact that she seems to know an above-average number of spells compared to other wizards at the moment. But other than that, there is nothing special. Alright, keep an eye on them. Just what was Seth planning? Was he also building a party, but what did he want to do with these failures? Mark could not wrap his head around it, but he did not complain. At least there would be no one else aiming for people the association wanted to recruit. They left the city this morning? What's their destination? Southwest, sir. But there are only ruins there. Just what is their purpose? They were lent a wagon by the church that could take them to the edge of the safe zone. Edge might have been the wrong way to phrase it, since there was no defined line that split the habitable city from the monster-infested ruins. The safety zone was just how the citizens called the zone where people of the military and the Hunter Association were patrolling. Past this point were technically still safe places to live. The chance of monsters coming here was slim, so people still lived in these places without official protection. There would still be officers that kept public order, and hunters would come if monsters attacked. Even further away came the slums, where people lived that had no other option. This area was unsupervised by the government. They had simply lost too many during the war, and there were not enough people to regularly patrol those areas. The monsters from the abandoned ruins were not the only dangers in this place. It was rife with desperate people and criminals making their living in the shadows. The only officials and hunters in this place were those that needed to manage the dungeons. The wagon came with a small team of church adventurers and was pulled by a massive armor bull. The bull was a beast armored by bone plates. They would wait for Seth and the others and ensure the wagon's security in the meantime. It was an interesting experience to travel through an advanced megacity by wagon. The bull was not slow by any means, but they still had to spend a night at a hotel and arrived at the edge of the safety zone on the second day after their departure. They would still need at least another 3 days by foot to reach their destination in Arigiri. Thankfully, just walking posed no problem to a player's stamina. Past the edge of the safety zone was not that much different from inside. There was no sharp separation that signaled an increased danger. There were fewer people on the street. The city looked a little more run down since many damages caused by monsters were not repaired. From what Tecker and the others told him, that a lot of places here were empty. A big part of the former population of almost 1 billion had died during the chaos after the change and the war with the Mer people. They were still a lot better off than Alpha, a city that had been completely wiped out by the forest. Seth had no idea whether there were any survivors other than himself. These outskirts were still safe since there were still people keeping up public order. The party was still relatively relaxed as they walked along with one of the greater highways that originally connected the satellite city with the capital. Actually, if they had access to a manual cart, they could have used the railways to get to Arigiri. But most working means of transportation were controlled by the government and could not be used without permission. Especially not if they were traveling into a danger zone where their return was uncertain. After 2 days of quiet journey, they became vigilant as the city around them slowly transitioned into the slums. One could call the slums already part of the abandoned part of the district. It was just that people without a better choice and the scum of society had taken up residence in this thin border just outside the reach of the executive authorities. Dungeon breaks could happen here at any moment since adventurers and guild staff were often obstructed from managing them. It was a common thing for monsters and crooks to roam the streets. It was still a day's journey until they reached the quest area. Chapter 182. Arigiri. It slightly reminded Seth of his exploration of Deltan. The city was partly in ruins and severely marred by the activities of all kinds of giant and humanoid monsters. Not just traces of fights but also signs of primitive settlement or nests. Graffiti and broken barricades bore witness to human habitation past the apocalypse. Dried blood could be seen here and there, but there were no corpses. An ecosystem full of monsters and desperation would not waste any resources. Seth was using his map to navigate then, and they had left the highway and entered one of the narrower normal streets between the ruins. They had spotted flying creatures above the highway from afar and fathomed the chance be spotted was slimmer here. But they had not gotten very far when they heard a soul-stirring screech from above. On the peak of a crumbled rooftop sat a gargoyle. Its wings were wide open as it screamed at them as if to provoke and intimidate them. Gargoyle Screecher Leave 39. It was not as big as the things they had seen from a distance, but it was troublesome. Kill it quickly and hide in the building. The Lich warned them via telepathy. Link and Seth shot at the Screecher, easily reaping its life with surprising ease. Even so, it had a higher level. It was not a strong creature, especially not if measured against their weapons. They hurriedly broke open the closest entrance door to hide inside. Just before closing the door, they got a glimpse at why the Lich had hurried to warn them. The scream was not just a weak sound attack, its main function was to call the swarm. Big bulky gargoyles were gathering the skies above. The bodies were big and grey like a boulder, and their batwings looked disproportionate to the body like those of a fat fly. Despite looking clunky and slow, they had arrived at an unprecedented rate. The fact that they looked so slow, but were actually quite fast, made them very dangerous. They were also not small in numbers, as at least 3,040 individuals had gathered at the call of the annoying little Screecher. Using observation would have alarmed them, so they needed to depend on Al's appraisal. They range between leave 40 to leave 50. They have incredible strength and defense. You should hide for now and go on after they leave. Following her advice, they activated their spells and skill to hide their presence and waited. They used the break to eat some rations and recover their stamina. When the gargoyles did not find or see anyone after 15 minutes, they dispersed again. The hunter took a moment to look for the Screecher's corpse, but it was gone. This ecosystem did not waste anything. Even if it was the corpse of a comrade. The party changed its approach after running into the Screecher. Instead of using the streets, they changed to traversing the buildings and ruins. Like this, they were only for a few moments in the open when crossing the road to the next building. They had not done this before, because the narrow space in a building was not favorable to them. In case other monsters inhabited the ruins and decided to stage an ambush on them, it would be harder to cope with. It proved to be less dangerous than they thought. Seth guesses that it was because this was the territory of the gargoyles. They did not meet any dangerous creature in the building. The detour through the buildings and ruins cost them some time but nothing more. They traveled a good part of their journey in the territory of the gargoyles. The change was evident when they left it behind. Monsters of human size and humanoids like mutated beasts or mer people became more frequent. They had probably circumvented the slums completely by traveling under the protection of the gargoyles and came right into the multicultural hodgepodge of the abandoned zone. It was not just mer people and their monstrous creation left from the war that they saw, but they also came across the settlement of orcs and lizardmen and the nests of wolves. It was the aftermath of many different dungeon breaks and invasions through the pathwork. This place was actually in a kind of balance where all these beasts were in a standoff and kept each other in check. The party did the only sensible thing. Sneak past all bigger groups and get rid of any individuals they came across as quietly as possible. If this had been in a game, Seth would have been intent on stirring up some trouble and tilt this balance into a full-on massacre. But right now, the quest came first. He had to find out whatever had happened to Evie and bring her back if she was still alive. They spent the night in a relatively intact department store. Seth would not go out of his way to plunder at this point in time. But since a jewelry shop was throwing alluring glances at him, he packed up the whole jewelry section and whatever he found in the safe. Electric watches were not working in Y-City, but he found a luxurious selection of mechanic watches in the safe. He could sell these as is and maybe enchant one for each party member. Watches took the same place as bracelets in the system menu, it would be a shame to waste such a precious space. As for the jewelry, he would dismantle and melt down those he could not use and enchant the others as is. He would give them simple enchantments in his free time. It would not give him much proficiency, but it sounded fun to flood the market with cheap enchanted stuff. The next day they finally arrived in the area of Aragiri. The oceanic creatures had grown in numbers here. There were slime-covered tunnels and caves dug into the buildings and streets. The city was also distinctively more destroyed. Broken down and burned out ruins, signs of claws, and destructive magic everywhere. Rusty and broken firearms were littered among the rubble. It was still the time back then when people had not realized yet that firearms did not work on these otherworldly and magical monsters. The party did not get around fights in this area, but the beasts here were unorganized and their advantage in levels was not great enough to overcome their unfair gear. But the beast gave a good amount of experience and soon the people in the part started leveling up one by one. The last to level up was actually Seth when he finally reached Level 28. Several skirmishes later they finally entered the quest area. What greeted them here was silence. The place lacked monsters, it was almost eerie after they had slaughtered their way in. I don't have a good feeling about this. Link mumbled. Well, we are going in anyways, Seth answered. There was a slight resistance like a temporary headache as they entered deeper into the quest area. But it was nothing they worried about. Chapter 183. Evie Edmonds. Ding. Welcome to the post-apocalypse player. It was the beginning of everything. Before she could react, the house shook and she heard explosions and screams outside. Evie! Evie! Wake up! We have to hurry. There was a warning. We have to evacuate, someone is attacking the district. Her aunt rushed into her room in a panic, grabbed her hand, and started pulling her out of the room. Auntie! Wait! What is going on? Did you also get that message? That's not important. Click it away. We have to evacuate with the forces or else we will be left behind. Evie could not do anything before her aunt pulled her out of her room and towards the front door. It was night outside and she could see the burning cityscape outside through the kitchen window. Get whatever you can carry. We need to hurry. Her uncle and cousin were already busy packing a few bags with food and other stuff. Her breathing sped up. It was the beginning of a panic attack. When her brother vanished, she had waited for him at home. She called the police and stayed home alone for several days while they were processing the case. She moved in with her aunt's family after a robber broke into her home and her heart was racing, and her hands started shaking as her vision got distorted. No, 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 she grabbed the couch to lean against and her nails dug into the leather. This was not the time. She had to calm down. Evie. Evie, her aunt grasped her face between her two warm, slightly sweaty, palms. Evie, concentrate on my voice. You have to calm down. Concentrate on your breathing. Slow controlled breaths. We have to go, sweetie. Are you okay? She had slightly calmed down. She had no idea how much time had passed, but the bags were packed, and the family was ready to evacuate. Evie looked out the window. There were still screams and gunshots in the distance. The sky was tinged in a red glow from the fires in the city. Are you sure we should leave? She uttered. Of course, once we are at the shelter, there will be people to protect us. But we have to hurry. While they were talking, she could hear her uncle from the door. What is this? Safe zone? Of course, we have to leave. Her uncle stepped out into the hallway. Her elder cousin followed, after making a weird face and nodding. Come, Evie. We need to leave. Everything will be okay. Holding her hand, she stepped to the door, paused for a moment, and stepped outside. When Evie stepped toward the door, she got a message. You are about to leave the safe zone. Once you have left the safe zone, it will dissolve, and you cannot return. Are you sure you wish to leave the safe zone? Y/N. Auntie, are you sure? It says this is a safe zone, so shouldn't we? Sweetie. If we stay here, we will be swept away in a war zone. Hurry we. No, get back. Run. Emily, get back into the apartment. It was her uncle that came running back from the stairwell. He was covered in blood, the bags nowhere to be seen. Rick, what happened? The answer came rushing from the stairs. It filled out almost the whole hallway. A leathery warty skin stretching over terrifying mountains of muscles. Its giant maw filled with shark teeth came shooting down the hallway. It snapped shut and her uncle had vanished. A cleanly cut-off pair of legs fell to the ground as the giant beast swallowed its bite. The cold dead eyes focused on her and her aunt before the giant mass of flesh got back into movement. Come back in. Evie screamed and pulled on her aunt's hand, but her aunt was petrified. She tugged and pulled as tears filled her eyes and her bodily functions went haywire as the panic attack came back. She couldn't cross the door completely without answering the question. All she could do was tugging on her hand and gripping her shoulder. In one moment, she tried to pull her aunt into the safe zone, hectically looking between her and the monster. The next moment they were gone. Her aunt, the monster, her hands were gone. The creature had charged and was on the other end of the hallway now. Leisurely crunching something with blood dripping to the floor. She fell back into the apartment and landed on her butt. All she could do was look at the bloody stumps where her hands were once supposed to be. Tears kept clouding her vision as she fought to calm herself. Her blood kept spurting all over the place and she knew this would be her end. With feet and elbows, she searched the kitchen for the first aid kit. She almost fell back into a panic when she realized that it was most likely in one of the bags outside. In the end, she managed to find belts among the stuff strewn over the floor. It was terribly difficult to use 2 belts to put a tourniquet on, just using her teeth and feet. When the blood stopped flowing, she was drowned by a wave of relief and fell unconscious. The first thing that came to her mind when she slowly came back awake was the annoying golden sentence. The characters kept jumping and spinning. Tears started flowing when she remembered what had transpired ever since this had appeared before her. Ding! Title: Precocious gained. You fought a monster before even finishing the tutorial. Experience gain increased by 15%. Ding! Title: Hard to kill gained. You survived a deadly encounter with an overwhelming opponent on your own. Your endurance and defense will increase slightly when you are close to death. What was going on with these? She had calmed down, as much as it was possible considering she just lost her family and hands. She needed to know more about the situation. She finally accepted the tutorial. Evie learned about the system functions and the different windows and was then thrown into the battle simulation with a goblin. Without her hands. But it was fair. The goblin had no hands, too. She had not much time to panic as the creature came charging at her. Now the creature was only about half her size and came brainlessly charging at her. In a fluid movement, she kicked the goblin against the head. Her heart raced like an engine. She had not taken self-defense classes for nothing. The goblin faltered and knelt on the ground. She had to end it. This was her only chance. She kept kicking her opponent on the ground. She kicked and stomped and didn't stop until it moved no more. Ding! Title: Desperate gained. A cornered rat is the most dangerous. When facing a life-threatening danger with low chances of survival, your attack will increase by 50%. Now she understood what titles were and how useful they could be, but why did most of them ask her to seek death? It was time for her to choose a job. There was a list of common jobs, a random job wheel, and a small list of jobs. From their description, she understood that these were based on the titles she got. For example, Berserker, a warrior that kept growing stronger, with the loss of HP. Or a bloodmancer that had various occult skills that used life as a resource instead of mana. There was only one class among them that actually assured her survival and didn't try to drive her to her demise. Chapter 184. Evie Edmonds, 2. Seth and the party were carefully walking into the silent zone. Relax. There are no monsters because this place is protected by magic wards. Someone with a caster class must have put these up. Now that the all-knowing sorceress told them, they spotted wards drawn here and there on the walls and the street. They were less like magic circles or circuits and more like ominous special sigils and formations. The group slightly relaxed as there would be no terrible monsters, but this didn't mean the place was safe. There could still be people. They didn't know who set up those wards. What if they were hostile? They were now within the quest area. All that was left was finding Evie or someone who could tell them where she was. Link went ahead to scout. He had shown his prowess in finding people when he went for a walk and brought an Amazon back home. Maybe he could come back with the quest goal this time? Considering she was a young woman, the chances were high the gourmet hunter would not miss her. The buildings around them had been mostly burned down and blown up by modern weaponry. Somebody had gone through the effort to clear the streets of most of the rubble. Without the constant cries and roars of monsters, they could hear the wind howling in the ruins. After the arduous journey here, this sudden silence was almost more unsettling than the constant danger they had gotten used to. I couldn't find anyone. But I found something strange. It's a huge graveyard. I looked around and it seems to be roughly in the center of the warded zone. A graveyard. Link led the party past a few blocks and soon a big plot of land covered in makeshift graves came into sight. Mounds of earth and rubble with wooden boards and crosses on them. Hundreds of them. Do you think Evie made these? Allison suddenly asked. Evie was the only one they knew that was definitely here. How long did it take to dig so many graves? Had she stayed here all this time? Or were there more people that did this? They started searching from the graveyard and looked through the intact houses and buildings. In the third house on the third floor, they started hearing a silent whimpering. An eerie weeping and sobbing were echoing through the hallways. It became louder when they reached the fourth floor. Ma, maybe she's a ghost. Link said, afraid. Should we really keep going? We have fought mind-consuming eldritch horrors in a fog dimension. And you are afraid of ghosts? Allison mocked him. Yes, they are my kryptonite. You got a problem with that, he barked back. Calm down, you guys. Did you forget my class? A ghost would be a great fortune. Seth reprimanded them. They followed the weeping into one of the few apartments with an intact door. There sat a humanoid figure with dark grey skin. Her back was turned towards them and the crying was heartrending. Ghoul Queen Evie Edmonds, Leave 9. Name, Evie Edmonds. Title, Precocious. Level, 9. Age 18. Class, Immortal Witch. Race, Ghoul Queen, Temporary, /Orihuma. Sex, Female. Affiliation. Health, 1000/1000. Mana, 60. The figure threw her head around with tears splashing away and looked at them when she felt observation used on her. Her eyes were completely black and her slightly opened mouth was filled with sharp fangs. Arim, hi. Evie. Seth said awkwardly. The class she had chosen was called Immortal Witch. The description during the class selection was an undying witch that could revive herself, even if she died. It sounded like a great epic class, perfect to survive, right? She had struggled a lot with depression after her brother vanished, but looking immediate death straight in the eye made her realize that she could not die yet. There were still answers she needed. She could not die here. That's why she chose this class. Despite her newfound motivation, when she left the tutorial and heard the notification that she gained new skills, a wave of lethargy came over her. She felt tired, listless, and weak. Right. She had almost forgotten that she had not just lost her hands, but also a huge amount of blood. Was there not a skill she could use for that? Her tired mind checked her skills. She had a lot of passive skills like Immortal Soul, Undying, and Auto-Revival that would make sure she would not die. She lost focus for a moment but found what she was looking for when she concentrated. Recovery Leave 1. It was a high-tier healing skill that could deal with even the worst wounds. Even regrow limbs and organs. Her joy was short-lived as she had two problems. She had not even close to enough mana to use such a strong skill. The bigger problem was that she needed hands to cast magic. She could not cast magic to heal her hands without her hands. This counted for most skills she had. Brewing, black magic, witchcraft. Everything that could help her in her situation was grayed out because she could not activate the skills without her hands. Tears started to well up again. She wouldn't die, but she had also no means to get away. Was she supposed to stab that giant beast to death with her bone stumps? Could she really recover from being eaten and digested? Would she live as a pile of poop? With those chaotic thoughts and broken hopes, she fell asleep. Her life from here on was empty. She recovered thanks to the passive skill health regeneration. It healed her stumps and she recovered from the blood loss, but her hands did not regrow. She did not dare to leave the safe zone. From her window, she saw the monsters roaming the city. Sometimes she saw people leaving the buildings. Had they also stayed in their safe zones and survived? They fought for their lives with these amphibious monsters using their starter weapons and equipment, but they never survived. It strengthened her fear and resolve to stay. Her only problems were food and water. Her aunt and uncle had packed up almost all the food when they fled. Tap water was still working, but she had no hopes that it would keep working forever. She filled every bottle she got her hands on. There was nothing else she could do. She kept vegetating like a corpse in her safe zone, spending her time in fear and depression. She had barely recovered from the loss of her brother, now she had fully relapsed. Still, she wanted to survive. She was waiting. For help, for a chance, anything that could help her get out. After a week, she saw no one try to leave their zones. Was everyone else dead already? There were fewer people, but the monsters became more numerous. She would often hear the scraping of claws and heavy steps in the hallway outside the front door. She rationed the little food she had. She also started rationing the water once it stopped running several days later. Over the following weeks, she kept growing weaker and weaker as her food supply dwindled. The scraping outside became more and more often. What if they came in? She drank more and more water to fight the hunger. Her health bar started to decrease as she slowly started to starve. In her delirious mind, the idea to leave and scavenge for food started to overpower her existential fear of the monsters outside. Maybe she really could stab those monsters to death? It came to the point where she felt the scraping was annoying and she became angry at those annoying monsters. It ended quickly when she remembered how easily those things would rip her apart. The cleanly bitten-off bony stumps that were left of her forearms were the best example. She had starter gear in the inventory, too. But she could not use the staff without hands and the robe was not useful in her case. Finally, there was a change. Not a favorable one. Her decision of going out was taken away from her as one day the door suddenly burst open with parts and splinter being launched into the room. Ding! Welcome, adventurer. You are the 25,869,348th to leave the safety zone in this region. She had been lying down close to the fall, pondering to leave or not leave. The accelerated splinters and wood chips perforated her. She was already dying when the giant amphibious lizard thing worked its way through the door frame. Her eyes slowly fell shut as the beast worked its way in. Ding! Passive skill auto revive has been activated. You lack mana. Ding! Passive skill undying has activated. Random undead race is being chosen. Race has been changed to walker. Ding! You are close to death. Your endurance has increased. Ding! You are desperate. Your attack is increased by 50%. Her head cleared and she looked up to the giant monster towering above her. She felt no hunger, fatigue, or pain anymore. Now she could fight. That was what she thought. In the end, she died again. She got revived. And died again. Chapter 185. Evie Edmonds, 3. The girl jumped off the ground and took a fighting stance. Pointing two sharpened bone stumps toward them. She was missing a big piece of waist where her shriveled-up intestines were visible and there were some other parts where chunks of meat were missing. She was covered in stitched-up cuts. She was an undead, this explained the diviner's ambiguous readings. She was not dead, but one could not call this alive either. Ah, please calm down. We are not here to hurt you, Evie. Seth hurried to say. He stepped into the room signaling the rest of the party to stay back. Dark ooze or pus from crying stained her cheeks, but her eyes were vigilant and focused on Seth. She was like a cornered beast. How do you know my name? She asked in a dry and raspy voice. She had hesitated as if shocked from hearing her own voice. She was still sentient. Seth wanted to give her the brother's wallet first. He belatedly realized that she could not hold it. He wanted to flip it open to show her the pictures and the ID, but tears had already started to well up again from her big dark eyes. She had recognized the wallet because it was a present from her. She limped closer and clumsily took the wallet from his hand. She sunk to the ground and embraced it. What happened to him? It was the first clue of her brother ever since he had vanished. Despite everything that had happened to her, this stayed the deepest scar in her heart. In front of them sat the poor undead girl. Seth recounted their adventure and how they found her brother in that place. He showed her the book and told her what he knew from their expedition into the fog. It took a while to explain, and it gave her enough time to calm down enough to talk with them. Once Seth ended his quest and his intentions to help her, it was her turn to explain what had happened to her. It was a circle of dying and coming back to life as a different undead. Each time after she died, she soon revived barely in time to prevent her from being eaten whole. She lost pieces of her legs and arms, and the beast had even bitten a big chunk of meat out of her side before she finally got away. She had revived as a ghoul queen, a rather high-ranking undead, which gave her enough power to flee from the beast. It was all that was left in her mind at that moment. She had no hands and running had become hard after a part of her leg was missing. It was Evie's new race that gave her the nimbleness, despite all hindrances, to get away and hide. She crawled into the next best niche in between rubble, where none of the beasts would fit in. It took her a while to find the courage to check her body. When looking at the unreliable leg, she found her calf missing and the leg bone broken. The bones of her forearms were exposed, skinned during her hectic escape. The biggest horror was the giant hole in her belly, where her intestines were hanging out. Undead felt no pain. This was the only reason she was able to run or even stand in this kind of condition. It was her status that made her despair. Her attributes were greatly increased, but she had even less mana now. There was no way she could cast recovery or revive even if she miraculously got a new pair of hands. How was she supposed to turn back into a human now? Her class would not allow her to die, but her existence as an undead was terrifying. Even without pain, she could feel her whole body like a damp, heavy, and stiff clothing. It felt foreign. Every movement was a conscious effort. And the world felt unbelievably cold and empty. Even without her hands and close to death, being alive was a lot better than this. She sat there for a long while. She didn't know how long, and mourned herself and her family when it came to her. What she lacked was strength. All she needed to do was level up. She would gain more mana and maybe get a skill to help her. Hope was budding again. She thoroughly studied her skills and her new body. It was relatively strong. She fathomed she could maybe try to kill weaker monsters in battle. All that was needed was to create a chance. The most reliable skill she could use without her hands was the witch wards. She only needed somehow draw or form the specific ward and initiate it with mana. As long as she managed this, it would have at least some effects. Setting up a ward cost mana in the initial creation, but afterward, the ward would consume the surrounding magic to not just power, but also strengthen itself. One of the most basic wards was able to deter enemies. The beasts here were all not too intelligent, so even the basic wards could influence them. She used this to set up a small safe zone for herself. From here she kept exploring the ruins, looking for weak enemies. In the beginning, the only creatures weak enough to be her prey were her brethren. People who had died and were stuck under rubble or locked in the ruins. Her first victim was a helpless zombie, stuck under rubble. The beasts were too big to get in here. She sat at his side for several days until she finally found the resolve to end its misery. It was hard to kill without any good means of attack and barely a working limb. She sat on the rubble and kicked its head with her one good foot. It took her 2 or 3 kicks to crush the skull. Learning from this, she had to make her joke come true. She fully exposed the broken off bones of her forearms and sharpened them to points. She also learned how to use the skills of her undead race. It was possible to activate Poison Claw using her bone spikes now. It became easier after her first kill, but she still felt sorry. These people were like her. They had not chosen to become a monster. All of them had just wanted to live their peaceful life. She started burying the zombies she had killed and the corpses she found in the ruins. She could not do much more for them. Over time her skills grew and she gained new skills like CQC. The wards became stronger and her range of activity grew. She was still no match for the bigger monsters, but she could hunt the smaller ones. Her plan got a small dent when she leveled up the first time and found out that her APS were spent automatically because of her race. But it was just a small hurdle. Her mana still grew slightly, so all she needed was time. She was the immortal witch, she had time. She just needed to persevere. Yeah, just needed to persevere. When she reached level 5 it unlocked a few new skills. None of them could help her in her current situation, but it gave her hope. Maybe she could unlock one later? No matter how unlikely it was. She needed this tiny hope to keep going. Time was lost in her continuous routine of hunting, setting upwards, and taking some time to mourn for her dead family and regret her life. As an undead, she needed no sleep and could see in the dark, so it went on unobstructed by the time of the day. And one day when she was occupied with mourning the dead again, she felt a prick in the back of her head and found a bunch of visitors had come. Chapter 186. Heads stuck together. Seth's quest was not finished yet. This meant it was time for him to take care of the girl. He wanted to bring her to Y City and help her level up. Her class sounded interesting and he was not against her permanently joining his company. The elephant in the room was obvious. They could not just bring an undead back with them to Y City. Sentient or not, Seth was unsure whether people could understand her existence and accept it. This meant that they had to somehow solve her problem. They all sat on the ground and stuck their heads together. They thought about the problem that presented itself before them. Well, the problem was not that hard to solve. The primary problem was that she lacked hands to cast with. Everyone already had the same idea and was staring at Seth. It was Allison that boldly spoke what everyone thought. She needs hands, can't you make her prosthetics? She asked Seth. The blacksmith in question was sweating buckets of water. He probably could. But he didn't know how. He had to make them usable for casting, too. Maybe? I don't know, okay? I had some ideas, but I don't know whether they would work. I have no idea about anatomy or undead. How am I supposed to make a prosthetic that allows an undead to cast magic? The only probable idea I have could hurt her and not work at all. Let's ask the oracle. The last thing he wanted to do, was worsening the situation. He opted to ask the expert. Don't call me that. Expert of undead anatomy. I don't know if that is better, but spit out your ideas. Seth listed the options he came up with. His first thought was obviously making mechanical hands and connect it to Evie's sinew or something. Did undead even use sinews and muscles to move? The problem was that he was far from a universal genius. The idea sounded great, but he had no idea how to actually build such a hand and connect it with her biological functions. His next idea was to maybe make a hand using enchantments, like those edgy MCs that would lose an arm and exchange it for a silver artifact arm later on. But he didn't need Alzalsa to know that his enchantment skill was far from being able to make that. Yep, with your skill it would be impossible. It might even be hard for me to succeed first try. 1 hour would not be nearly enough. Alzalsa still commented. The rest of the party was silently listening. These were the two ideas they also had. But none of them was a clocksmith and knew how to do it. Seth's most promising idea was to make a gauntlet and infuse part of her soul into it. This was the idea with most uncertainties. He thought that maybe she would be able to move it, because of undead properties. He didn't know whether this would get in the way of her skills. He didn't know if this would enable her to cast magic. Worst case he could damage her very soul. Stop worrying so much. Souls are more robust than you think. Let me take a look at her. It followed several seconds of silence. The party looked around cluelessly. Evie was nervous, ever since she heard a foreign voice in her head. Oh, she's an immortal witch, no need for worries. Though my advice would be that you make a skeletal hand and new arm bones. Those would work better. Seth grimaced when he heard this. He had avoided this topic on purpose. I have no idea how a skeletal hand looks like in detail. Aren't there a lot of corpses outside? Just dig one up and get some hands for reference. I don't see the problem. He did his best not to show it, but he really didn't want to doctor around with rotting human remains. Undead and killing them was one thing, getting close up with a corpse was unsavory. He was seriously considering dropping the quest here. It was hard to withstand Evie's and the party's sparkling eyes when they heard that he could do something so cool. He felt really unwilling, but sometimes one had to make sacrifices. Link, Tekker, and Evie went down to the graveyard. Tekker looked at the bone spikes at the end of her arms. Did you really dig these all? Alone? He asked worriedly. She looked away with a hint of sadness in her eyes. I had a lot of time. was her only comment. She showed them where she had buried a female zombie. It was a shallow grave, not much more than the corpse covered with rubble. We are really very sorry. We will bring them back later. Promised. Tecker said before they took the 2 forearms from the grave. They came back and found that Seth had already summoned his smithy. He unwillingly took the 2 limbs from them and put them on his work table. The bony were covered in dirt and rotten flesh. Seth could deal with clean bones, but this was really nothing for him. With a sigh, Seth used blueprint and modeled a pair of skeletal hands based on these 2 examples. Like this, he would not have to deal with this longer than he really needed to. When he was done making a blueprint for artificial skeleton hands, Tecker and Link brought the arms back to their original owner. As a material, Seth chose magic steel. He had considered using the uncommon snake bones before until he realized the extent of this endeavor. There were 27 bones per hand in addition to ulna and radius for the forearm. 29 per arm. Seth needed to make almost 60 bones. If he used the bones, he would have to use energy manipulation leave 2 and the skill of Karen's obel. Seth also refrained from using smithing ballads. He had no concentration to spare since he needed to use soul infusion and spirit capture at the same time. To begin with, he got the idea because Evie gave him a similar feel like his items or Al's phylactery. Maybe it was because of Evie's skill immortal soul that detached her soul from the well-being of her body. From what they found out from Evie and their great sorceress. If she had enough mana, auto-revive would create a whole new body for her, if her original was destroyed. The skill would recover the best state before death. But Evie got her class after losing her hands, so her best state would have been without her hands. Using his skills, he could pull out a part of Evie's soul and infuse it while roughly smithing each bone one by one. It was a lot harder to keep the piece of the soul separated and mixing it into the material. Using his skills on a still living sentient soul was a great challenge. He also had to ignore Evie ambiguously moaning beside him. Every hit with the hammer or tug with his skills provoked a reaction from the young ghoul queen. She had fallen unconscious when Seth had started pulling out pieces of her soul. Using the jeweler's table, he refined and fit them. When they were smooth and fit together in a way that satisfied Seth, he walked to the waters of sticks and started dunking them into the water barrel. What now? Seth asked, looking at the pile of metallic bones on his workbench. Remove her crippled ulna or radius. You will see it then. Tecker, you do it. Seth delegated this important task. Tecker sighed and pulled out what was left of Evie's forearms. What happened next was something the party had never seen before. He had no chance to take a step back when the bones escaped from the workbench and shot towards the unconscious girl. The arm bones took their place and the hand assembled itself. Now Seth understood what the sorceress had been talking about. It was like those skeletons that kept reassembling themselves if you did not break them with special means. After a few seconds, a new pair of steel grey skeleton hands with a blue hue had assembled at the end of Evie's arms. After her souls had reassembled with her body, the girl woke up. The first thing she did was touching her face and rubbing her eyes with her new hands. Her drowsiness soon turned into shock, and joyous tears started flowing again when she realized that she had hands. For the first time in almost 1 year, she had a pair of hands. She could not stop using her fingies like a newborn. I guess this solves our first problem, hey. Chapter 187. The smaller problem? Seth already had plans to make her some soul armament. Sure, this was a slight loss for him, but he had his reasons. On one hand, there was obviously the quest, but on the other was winning her as a team member. She was immortal, she could brew potions, she could also take the role of a healer and cause debuffs. She knew Revive, a skill that could even revert death outside of a dungeon as long as it is used shortly after death. It was a typical high-ranking healer skill Puffles did not possess. Seth would happily take her into his party. And it was an excuse to grind his spirit forging a little more. Soon the savory smell of roasted lizard meat was drifting through the air. A drooling ghoul queen was lured to their fire by the smell of cooked food. Did ghouls eat? Yes. What did they eat? Corpses and raw meat. Evie had survived on raw and rotten meat until now. Although her taste was almost non-existent as an undead, this didn't mean that it was pleasant for someone with an intact human mind. They just wanted to eat when Link suddenly looked up. Someone is coming, he said, raising their vigilance. Everyone corrected the gear and stood up. Seth looked regretfully at the freshly cooked food. How could somebody so cruelly disrupt them during mealtime? A bunch of rough-looking men was walking down the streets towards them. They wore a patchy assortment of dungeon loot. Seth could not take a sneaky peek at their status, but their equipment was above average compared to the adventurers he had seen in Y City. Their faces were unshaven and had an ugly smile. Hee, who would have thought that she had more friends? Hey, monster! Are you done running? Your stupid wards won't help you anymore. They laughed, ignoring Seth's party as if they were just some flies on the wall. They had only malicious eyes for the Ghoul Queen standing beside them. You know them. Seth fell silent when he saw the expression of pure hatred on the face of this innocent girl. Now her looks fit the race of a Ghoul Queen. Her story had made Seth a little suspicious, but now he was sure that there was something she had not told them. A big something. Keek, today will be your end, monster. And we'll also wipe out the last of your friends. Only now did he turn to Seth and the others. This is nothing personal, really. We can't have random people running around on our turf. Bro, those guys are filthy rich. The worst thing they wear is uncommon and most of it I can't even appraise. Oh. An unexpected windfall. Forget what I said. This just became personal, he said with a toothy grin that showed his rotten teeth. Stay back, I will take care of them. Evie said more with a snarl than human speech. With great speed, she charged at the group of 5 crooks before Seth or anyone else could stop her. No matter how disgusting these newcomers were, their party play was well trained. Despite Evie's overblown physical stats thanks to her undead race, she was soon beaten black and blue. Some broken bones and cuts later, she was hit back, rolled over the floor, and came to stop close to the party's feet. Wow, you are so cruel. Letting your little friend fight all alone. Are you afraid? I will give you a chance, leave your equipment behind and we will spare your lives. Dante. They are lying. Evie pressed out between clenched teeth. She could not move anymore. The crooks had thoroughly incapacitated her. What kind of drama was this? Seth had let her get beaten up because he thought it was a good punishment for keeping secrets from them. But now even the brat was doubting their strength? He scrunched up his nose and used observation on the 5 crooks. Ding! Your skill observation leave 4 had become observation leave 5. Crook 1 leave 39. Mob character B leave 37. Extra 3 leave 33. Villain the 4th leave 35. Henchman 1 leave 37. He didn't even bother reading their names. They all ranged slightly above leave 30. Where did they get their arrogance from? Their faces distorted when they felt the skill used on them. You saw we are decked out in better items, and you still want to threaten us. Seth sarcastically. Kek, items are not everything. Forget leaving here alive. All of you will die. Stop stealing my lines. Link, with a nod he signaled the hunter to attack. The other had already gotten ready hidden behind Seth's back. Immediately after the nod, a volley of bolts flew towards the party of robbers. But it was blocked by a barrier cast by one of the bandits. Hee, that won't work on us. Pollard. The priest in the back had started violently sneezing and was unable to stop. Seth laughed out loud and gave Link, who was still looking clueless, a thumb up. The curse option had triggered, and just like the curses that Wathata had thrown at them, blocking with a barrier could not stop this effect. Damn it, Pollard, get your shit together. They had no time to care for their comrade as a giant wind scythe was rushing down the street towards them. Allison was not just standing around. Although a little slower, she too had been chanting from the start and had just finished casting. Hurriedly the tank and the off-tank lifted their uncommon shields and activated their skills to shield the members behind them. The two managed to block the huge wind blade, but there were deep gashes in their shields. They had almost been split apart. It was the effect of Allison's training. Seth had promised her knowledge and he kept this promise. Although he could not hand over the token to her, she was able to spend some time under Alzalsar's tutelage in the fog dimension. With Seth's recommendation, she also joined the church as a lay follower and got access to the church library. Magic was a proficiency-based skill like those of crafters, but proficiency was not only gained by using the magic, but also by gaining knowledge about it. And for someone with the title Bookworm that granted the passive skill Devourer of Knowledge, this was like jumping over the Dragon Gate. The skill granted additional intelligence for learning specific knowledge and skills, mana for reading books, and damage for learned spells. Her skills had grown to a terrifying level. It was just that at this party, she did not get much opportunity to shine because she needed some time for casting. It was the only drawback, she lacked skills that decreased the casting time. Seeing her power demonstrated validated Seth's decision to use a big soul for her equipment. Chapter 188. popping the problems. Seeing their shields almost fail rattled the two robbers. What are you two doing? Can't you see they are reloading? Rush them, you numbskulls, their leader was raging and pushing the tanks from behind. While their priest was still trying to cope with a terrible sneezing attack, the rest of the party rushed towards Seth and the others. The tank was a Templar, the off-tank a knight, the leader an axe warrior. The last one vanished when the boss gave his order. It was a shadow thief, similar to an assassin class, but more focused on a thief's talents. Tekker, you take the back. I will play with these guys. Seth felt a bit peeved thinking that Evie had actually told them to run away. Did they look that weak? He readied the big wyvern blade, showing his intent to take on all three of them on his own. An unwitting smile appeared on the opponents' faces as they saw his baseless bravado. They had an appraisal skill themselves. They knew he was just level 28, what could he do to them? He was just as dumb as the last guys who had helped the little monster escape. With the shield in front of his chest, Seth took a stance and wound up for a wide horizontal strike. The bandits' confidence and their grin grew seeing him telegraph his attack like that. The tanks lined up to block whatever attack it was together, again. But the blade didn't move. Dragon might. They heard a shout, and their bodies froze. A sudden weight forced them to stop in their tracks, and an indescribable feeling of fear and imminent crisis encroached on their minds. Now, the blade moved. The edge lit up with a terrifying pale light, and as it moved into a horizontal slash, a massive cloud of pale flame shot towards the petrified group of attackers. Seth was not the smartest, but he also wasn't stupid. Why would he go into a melee fight with classes that were specialized in melee combat? Even though he had considerably improved during his spars with Tord, it was still painfully obvious that he had a great disadvantage against combat classes. Especially if they had a great level advantage. The two tanks were able to get a grip on their thoughts and activated their protective skills right before the cloud of fire washed over them. They were surrounded by bright light from all sides and felt like getting cooked in an oven, despite their skills. But they withstood it. The boss looked miserable ducking in between the two tankers, but soon the attack would have passed them. Moments passed. Soon the fire would have passed them. Soon it would be over, right? On the outside stood Seth and controlled the flames to form a rotating dome around the three. At this point, it cost Seth almost nothing to just maintain this dome. The street pavement started melting and glowing in a bright orange like magma. No screams would escape his hellish pizza oven. Seth waited for the kill notification. Ding! Extra 3 leave 33 has been killed. You have gained experience. He pursed his lips. This wasn't Seth's kill. The thief had stood no chance against the combined might of his other party members. When he looked back, he could only see a headless corpse and some bloody residue on Tekker's shield. Did he pop his head with the spike? Ding! You have killed Crook leave 39. You have earned experience. Ding! You have killed. You have earned experience. Did their skills finally run out? The notifications followed each other quickly. The dome of fire dispersed the moment Seth stopped controlling and fueling it. On a red-hot bed of molten street laid 3 burned black corpses in twisted and broken poses. Seth's heart raced and his stomach turned a little. It was the first time in a long while that he distinctly felt calm reaction. It was easy to think of a way to reap lives, but this was only the second time he had to kill another human. But the effect was a long shot off from his first time. Was he getting used to killing humanoids? Are you okay? Tekker asked worriedly with his deep warm voice. All of them had lived in a dirty world for a long time. The big man understood his feelings. Seth took a deep breath and sighed. I'm okay. Let's loot these guys and see what presents they left for us. The equipment of the briquettes was ruined. Even if he melted it down, it was just ordinary materials that got their abilities from a dungeon at best. But there was still the item box that every player dropped. The thief's equipment was still okay, I could be sold in the city for some money. In the meantime, the gourmet hunter and Allison had gone ahead and tied up the sneezing priest. Allison turned away as Link stripped the poor sob down to his underwear. He had just seen his friends get wiped out. Copious amounts of snot, tears, and drool had joined the compulsive sneezing. The wizard girl had no intention to get in range of the projectile-like body fluids. Stashing away the loot and looking over the situation, Seth felt quite satisfied. He crouched down beside the incapacitated Evie and poked her cheek. Saw that? Hey? We are no pushovers. I knew your story sounded a little fishy. Who would spend so much time crying, when they already have a plan and strategy to gain strength? You would be a lot stronger at this point if your story was true. Before I help you any further, I want to know the truth. No more lies. He kept poking her cheek to emphasize his words. And it was a little fun poking her puffy cheek, while she was looking at him with reproachful eyes and no means to stop him. I didn't lie. Not fully. She was not a ghoul queen when she escaped the beast's maws but an arch-zombie. She really had spent some time mourning and hunting. And there had really been visitors. It just was not Seth's party. It was a few weeks after she had found her new way of unlife. She needed no food or sleep, so she spent day and night hunting and drawing wards. A safe zone in the middle of guaranteed death had soon attracted a bunch of people. At first, there was a misunderstanding, but she was lucky. The first people she met were other survivors from the immediate neighborhood. She had even met one or two of them before the disaster. They were able to communicate, and she gladly offered them to stay within the boundaries of her ward. In time they all got closer and formed a party to hunt more monsters and widen the area of the wards. Among them was a farmer and they tried to start a field, so they would not have to scavenge for food anymore. Their little community kept growing with every desperate refugee that somehow found his way into the safe zone. Many of them became her friends and it helped her to keep going. It was a distraction from her pain, to hunt and to live with them. It worked for the first few months but there were not only nice people in the world. After some time more and more bad people started appearing in the ruins. It came to fights and losses. The number of graves kept growing until one day everything changed. All the criminals and crooks that had fled away from the city's influence banded together and decided to conquer the one safe zone in hell. However, Evie and her friends had lived in the ruins for several weeks, they had become complacent. Protected by Evie's magic they spent the time mostly peaceful. They stood no chance against the numerical advantage and were either killed or enslaved. Evie herself was caught, too. Chapter 189. Evie Edmonds, 4. The group of criminals called themselves the Raiders Union and were pushed out of the slums by bigger groups. Their leader was known as Marn and had the epic class Knight Commander which was able to power up their troops. They had come across the safe zone and found it easy to conquer. It was the start of Evie's hell. They interrogated the prisoner and found the reason for the safe zone. They found out that she was technically immortal and the reason for the safe zone. Starting there began her new daily routine. She was kept chained up in a dark cellar during the night. For most of her day, she was used as a punching bag for the raiders to train in arena matches. This was the real reason why she gained a skill like CQC. She lost many of her levels dying in these matches. Sometimes they would bring her out and force her to create more wards and if she didn't, they would kill the survivors of the little settlement. Otherwise, the prisoners would work for the raiders. Farming food, serving them as slaves, or to release their more secular urges. Evie was lucky that at least none among their oppressors had a special kind of thing for the undead. For some time, she felt like a true undead. There was no hope and she mindlessly followed the orders of her captors. Once again, she had lost many people she held dear. However, this time she had to get a grip on herself. There were still people alive. Seeing them suffer made her realize that she could not stay like this. Evie started using the nights to scout out the raiders' base with her astral projection. The map, the guards, the patrolling routes and shifts. She found where her friends were held and started formulating a plan. On the days she kept dying and creating wards she not only trained her witch ward skill and learned new wards. She also learned more about undying. The skill randomly turned her into an undead race when she lacked mana for auto-revive. One night, when all preparations were done, she enacted her plan. The catalyst was her dying several times in the arena until she revived as a ghoul queen and managed to survive until they were done with her. This was an undead strong enough to even fight with the elite criminals. She had realized the power of her new body and concealed it during the fights, barely surviving. Now she only needed to recover and wait for her chance. In the night Evie broke her chains and escaped her cell. Sneakily taking out the guards on her way. She had fought all of them in the arena, she knew their habits and powers. She evaded those that were too hard and snuck into the slave barracks. Her people were dirty and malnourished. They slept on thin blankets on the ground, but they were alive. She silently woke them one by one and explained her plan. Once they were out, they would flee and hide in a new safe zone. While playing an obedient slave she had not just placed wards to fend off monsters, but she had also set up many that would confuse enemies and hinder their pursuers. She had also not just prepared their escape, but also prepared to collapse the current safe zone. This was possible because of the changes in her skill level. Wards for cancelling, and remote activation in an area were unlocked. Her comrades were weak and could only follow her quite slowly, but they were not helpless. Their first destination was the armory of the raiders. Next, they plundered the pantry and loaded up on rations. With everyone armed and fed, they left the base and followed Evie through the ruined city. She had scouted their escape route with her astral projection long ago, to make sure there were no stronger monsters waiting for them outside the safe zone. When they crossed the border, she cancelled the wards that kept the raider base safe. But she did more. She activated wards that attracted monsters to the region. There was no plan from here on out. It was just running straight and get as much space between them and the raiders' base as possible. An ear-shattering cry from above signaled the success of Evie's plan. A gargoyle screecher had been attracted and spotted the leftover guards. It summoned the whole swarm to their location. The raider base was sieged by a horde of gargoyles, and their noise helped to attract even more monsters that would join the fray soon. They hid in the distance and took a moment to watch the chaos from afar. The guards were ripped apart by the gargoyles, and their screams alarmed the bandits inside. More monsters like a giant Komodo dragon was attracted from the vicinity, and the giant beast broke down the ramparts and walls. The bandits were tangled up in a sudden life-or-death battle with a monster horde and were hard-pressed for survival. With many of the beasts now attracted to the battle, Evie and the survivor were able to flee in relative peace. They returned to their old base, where they stayed for a short time to recuperate. The defiled corpses the bandits had left to rot had turned into zombies, forcing them to end their friends themselves. No beast had feasted on them or killed the zombies, thanks to Evie's wards. They had not much time but did the best they could to give them a proper burial. Some may have said it was a waste of time, but they could not have lived on with a clear conscience if they didn't do it. After crossing the territory of a group of drakes a few days of travel later, they thought these would be a good guard. They built a new base in the shadow of the drakes, thinking they were safe. They were wrong. The leader of the bandits had not given up. He was even more eager to find and kill the survivors now. A week before she met Seth, he had led an army from the slums to raid their new base and kill almost everyone she knew. Badly hurt, she had fled with some others back to their old base, but they soon died from their heavy wounds and constant attacks of bandit patrols. She was left alone after watching them die and could only bury them beside their old comrades. That was where Seth and the party had found her in the end. She had a lot to mourn. She had lost her brother and her other relatives. Finding new friends and comrades had helped alleviate the pain. Her mind had been constantly occupied. Even during her life as a slave, she was able to find a purpose and even managed to escape with the people that were left. Here she was alone. And in her solitude, things started to fade like a dream, and her mind kept wandering back to her brother. Despite everything that had happened, the loss of her brother was still the deepest scar in her heart. Before the apocalypse, she had already spent every day like a corpse. People had kept telling her that her big brother had abandoned her. Her loving brother who had always worked late to support them both. Her warm brother who had always come home and greeted her with a wide smile. Her big brother who protected her all this time. Was she really a burden to him? Had she held him back until he saw no other way but to run? The longer she waited for him, the stronger grew her doubt. They ate away at her heart. Without the shock from the apocalypse, she might not have found the strength to survive. It was her father's diary that resolved this heart demon, and she was really grateful to Seth, even though she would never see her brother again. It had helped her a lot. She had often paused while telling her tale. Goopy tears had filled her eyes again. She looked up to Seth. When you told me about my brother. You can't imagine how much it helped, getting even just a little bit of my old life back. Her metallic skeleton hands hugged the diary of her brother like a stuffed animal. Seth nodded. He didn't really know what to do. He had no real experience in comforting people, so he awkwardly glossed over the situation and changed the subject. So, do you want revenge on these guys? I wouldn't be opposed to raiding them once we fixed you. Seth had felt bad after killing those guys, but he was over it. Right now, he felt a lot better about killing them and was eager to kill even more. The reason was simple. Evie's story had really touched him. No, not really. He had gotten almost 30% experience from killing these henchmen. How many levels would they gain by raiding the whole hideout? Compared to monsters, humans were a much easier target to farm experience at the moment. There are over 100 bandits. We couldn't possibly. She planned to come back once she grew strong and take revenge. But not like this. She had never wanted to involve her benefactors in her own painful problems. She had even lied to them. I didn't ask about chances. I asked whether you want it. Do you want to take revenge and kill every last one of them? Yes, please. Chapter 190. Revenge is a meal best served hot. Then let's first fix you completely so you can savor the meal I'm about to serve you. Okay. They didn't just rush off, everything should be done in order. While Evie was slowly regenerating her HP, the party sat down and finished the meal Link had cooked, before they were rudely interrupted. Once the really important matters were taken care of, Seth went into the building to solve the little mana problem. Evie's auto-revive needed a whopping 500 mana to activate successfully. Recover needed 200 mana to be used. Seth went ahead and started forging soul armaments. He used medium-sized souls and started with gloves. After finishing the second glove he suddenly got a notification. Ding! Your skill Spirit Forging Leave 2 had become Spirit Forging Leave 3. He felt relieved, that making soul armament was enough to grind this skill. The problem with his class skills was, that they did not show a proficiency bar like the other skills did. Level 2 had no perks, but it became easier to define details and the performance got a tiny bonus. Seth forged 5 more soul armaments from medium-sized souls and wore them himself. He would give Evie the 2 gloves he made first and the older pieces he exchanged for the new ones. Seth also took the time to enchant the soul armament. He infused a few more souls to strengthen them because he wanted to keep the regeneration of bonus mana. The enchantment was nothing fancy, just a simple willpower upgrade that increased his willpower by 125. This gave him the confidence to avoid the headache, even if he went a little overboard. He unsummoned the smithy and returned to the outside. The girl had recovered enough to sit at the fire together with the party. Evie, come over here for a moment. He had told the party everything, but if they saw him hand out candies to newbies, they might ask for some too. No need to trigger that nuisance. The girl's eyes became big and round when he showed her the glowing transparent armor pieces. Take these and wear them. They give a great amount of bonus mana. When equipped with the armor it was visible for a short moment as a kind of ghostly armor and then sank into her skin. I really worked. My mana shot up by almost 700 points, she exclaimed in surprise. The next moment she was encased in bright light. Her wounds vanished and her flesh regrew as color returned to her skin and eyes. At first, her arms only recovered to stumps but she used recovery and the flesh crept up over the foreign bones forming a pair of fair hands. In a matter of seconds, the Ghoul Queen had turned into a healthy-looked girl with ash-brown hair and big brown eyes. Non-believing she stared at her hands and touched her cheeks. I'm alive again. I can feel. I have hands. It looked like it worked, but there was one thing Seth found suspicious. Where are the skeleton hands? Did they really substitute your original bones? He asked puzzled as he had not seen what exactly had happened. Yet. She literally had fists of steel. Al commented chuckling. Did you know about this? Of course. I have seen a few immortal witches in my time. Slowly exchange parts of their body for stronger materials and items was a custom among them. Since they are not reliant on their body for survival, they can do some pretty amazing stuff to strengthen themselves without getting any kind of health issues. Seth dreaded his future. Would this girl ask him to exchange her full skeleton for high-rated metals? He didn't deny that it sounded interesting but... oh well, maybe he would be able to find a medical model of a skeleton. One made of plastic. He would not mind that. Oh well. One problem solved. Let's go out and greet the party, Evie, he said, and they returned to the party. They stepped out into the daylight and Evie shuddered when she felt the sun's warmth for the first time in almost a year. Guys, say hello to Evie. The alive version. The party looked at her with great surprise and there was a certain glimmer in Link's eyes which provoked a sharp jab of Allison's elbow in his ribs. Her gaze was murderous and told him quite clearly to leave the girl alone. Seth and Evie joined the party at the fire. Okay guys, here's the plan. We gonna get some easy experience. The first step was interrogating their sweet little prisoner who had finally managed to stop sneezing. Seth's interrogation method was crude, to say the least. Look what I did to your friends, he pointed to the corpses solidified in poses of terror and pain that laid on the circular field of cooled molten stone. The molten metal of their items had burned deeply into their flesh. Tell me where your hideout is and how many of you are there. The man struggled and tried to look away. He shook his head and stayed silent. Seth grabbed the priest at the nape and shoved the squirming man headfirst into the charred remains of his friends. I told you to look. Take a good look. The skin was charred but the meat below was still juicy. As he was pressed against the body's surface, the still hot juices leaked and ran across his cheeks. The priest could not help but vomit. He retched and coughed for several minutes, completely emptying his stomach on the remains. Seth waited until he was done before crouching beside him. "I can assure you, that I can give you a fast and painless death or let you die an even worse one than them. The only question you should answer yourself now is, are your comrades worth the torture? Please spare me. I only joined them recently. I just wanted to survive. Hum. Let's make a deal. Do you see the young woman over there? If you tell me everything you know about this Raider Association or whatever they call themselves, I will leave your fate in her hand. Maybe she will have mercy." Evie looked completely innocent and was not recognizable after turning back into a human from an undead. Hope grew in the bandit's eyes when he thought that a young girl might really spare his life. He willingly told them everything he knew. The location of the hideout, their overall number, and the number and size of teams currently dispatched to search for the undead. He told them everything he knew and even drew a map of the hideout for them. When the bandit finally fell silent, he looked at Seth expectantly. The other nodded and kept his word. He stepped aside and handed Evie a blood drinker stiletto. "It's your choice whether he will live or..." Seth had not finished talking as the stiletto already pierced the man's left eye. The glimmer of hope slowly dimmed as life left the body. Another 5% was added to Seth's experience bar. "Oh, I earned a point in intelligence!" Evie exclaimed in surprise. He lied. He was among the first group of people that attacked us. And he did some of the worst stuff afterward. She explained herself when she saw the party staring at her in surprise but did not give any more details. Seth sighed. "You should have let me finish talking. You could have gained more stat points if you stabbed him some more. Now it's too late." "Oh. That reminds me that I should distribute my points," she exclaimed and became busy with her status window. Afterward, she explained that her status points were reset upon revival. She had regained the points that were automatically distributed while she was an undead. She followed Allison's advice and put about a third of them into intelligence and distributed the rest on endurance, agility, and willpower. In the meantime, Seth explained what they were about to do to the party and they came up with a plan. Chapter 191. Raid on the Raiders. Paul Lane, the leader and founder of the Raiders Association, was sitting in his big comfy chair in his room. He was reading a book and eating dried meat on the side. It felt good to be back in power. He enjoyed spending the late evenings like this. Paul was a rough man in the middle management of the underworld before the apocalypse. He was ruthless and not dumb, but he missed what was necessary to get to the top. This had not changed even after he gained an epic class. Despite his personal strength and the ability to power up all his allies, he was pushed out of the slums. He was lucky enough to come across some idiots that owned a safe zone. Life was great with a bunch of slaves and more than enough food. He simply took over a well-feathered nest. The monster raid and escape of the slaves was a great setback, but he survived. He and his close aides only grew stronger through this experience. He returned to the slums and rebuilt his organization. But it was already too late to compete with the set power structure at this point. Instead, he opted to return. Paul was not ready to let it go so easily. Somewhere in the ruins were those slaves and the undead that could create wards. He would find them again and everything would go back to the leisure days. The search was long and arduous, but in the end, he found them and took control of the new safe zone. It was a shame that they had become too strong to suppress and had to be killed. The biggest regret was that the sentient undead had managed to escape. As long as he got his hands on that monster and gained control over it, he could literally found his own country. He could be a king. Paul used a lot of money and even prepared a mage who specialized in stuff like mind control. He had sent many teams to search for it, leaving the base with 50 men for defense. Every team had at least one person that knew how the undead looked. This was a risky play on his part. The ruins were very dangerous, and he could lose many men on this search, but it was worth it. They were a sacrifice he was willing to make. His elites stood by his side. He had only sent the new ones and some of the weaklings that survived through fortune. He was just getting to the good part in the book when he smelled smoke. Had those idiots in the kitchen messed up dinner again? Their base was a small mall close to the center of the hijacked safe zone. They had chosen this place because the walls were thick, and the entrances already had several reliable safety measures. Sturdy barricades on all entrances enforced the defense again. Even if the wards were deactivated, they were confident to defend this place against most monsters in the city. Alarm! Fire! Bells suddenly resounded in the mall and the alarm was rung. Paul threw away the book and ran out of his room into the main passage. His room was close to the main entrance. Before the backdrop of the dark night sky, he saw the barricades outside burning with an eerie fire. "It's an enemy attack," he heard another call. He had just stepped outside and saw a swarm of fireballs raining down on the mall. They set fire to the roof while the ghostly flame was rapidly encircling the mall and blocked their escape routes. This was no normal fire. It was so hot that they had no choice but to flee inside the mall. Even from several meters distance, they felt like being burned. But they were not safe. The thick walls and fire safety door could not stop this flame. It easily entered the mall where it devoured anything flammable and liquefied everything else with a rapid speed. The bandits activated all kinds of protective skills in a hurry, just to be able to flee. The few mages among the cast water attribute magic which was like a drop on a hot stone. Those with lesser defense were lost to the fire while Paul and the few elites managed to reach the rooftop. The regular fire up here was almost comfortable compared to the terrifying flame below. Through the fire and the smoke, coughing and wheezing they looked for an escape route in a panic. The weird fire surrounded the mall, but there was still a gap at the long backside. One of his men spotted the chance. Sure death or a 3-0 fall. They jumped without much hesitation. Paul and 9 of his men landed on the ground. He rolled off and managed to avoid any broken bones. Others were not so lucky. 2 of his men were crippled as both of their ankles broke. The rest had also smaller issues like broken ribs or dislocated shoulders. All of them had lost a bunch of health, but this was not the place or time to whine. They grabbed their crippled comrades and limped away from the terrifying fires that were eradicating their beautiful base. They could not see far in the darkness, but they knew that they needed to find shelter. It was suicide to wander around in the ruin in their condition. And somewhere out there were people aiming for them. They needed to get some cover and aimed for the closest building. The door was kicked open and they stumbled into the dark hallway. A pair of giant fists and the terrifying sight of 3 rabid dog faces greeted them. It was the last thing Paul remembered when he woke up again. A terrible pain ran through his body. Paul could feel that his limbs were broken, and he felt a tight rope stopping him from moving. He looked around. He and his men were stripped to the underwear and tied up. They laid in a row on the floor of a dimly lit room. "Oh, you woke up sooner than I expected. Never underestimate a high level, I guess." On a chair to the side sat a tall man in dark red and black armor. Paul could spot something like golden chainmail beneath the impressive plate armor. Those items had to be extremely expensive. What had they done to offend such a figure? "Who are you?" he spat out. He could only talk with much pain as his throat had been parched and burned by the hot air in the mall. "It's not important who I am. It's important who she is." He pointed at a young girl, maybe 18, with long ash-brown hair and big eyes. Paul only noticed her now. She was staring at him with her unwavering dark eyes. "Who is she?" Paul asked confused. "Your judge. Your jury. An executioner, I guess," he said with a big smile that betrayed the gravity of what he just said. Paul now noticed the girl holding a dagger with a long, very slim blade. It was a quick and decisive movement, but the tip of the blade stopped just before piercing his eyes. A big gauntlet had grasped the girl's hand and stopped her attack. The tall man had jumped off the chair and stopped her. Did he change his mind and save him? Maybe there was still hope? "What did I tell you? Control your emotions a little and don't make the same mistake twice. Stab him several times and let him slowly bleed out. Also, try using the stiletto's skill. We have more than enough time, you should be able to use it once or twice on each of them," the man reprimanded her. "What are you saying, man? If you don't help me, just let me die in peace." "Why the hell did you have to step forward?" was all Paul could think as he watched the girl nod with a determined face. She proceeded to stab him several times, avoiding vital areas and inflicting a heavy bleed status. All he could do was watch on as his HP drained away and the girl went over to do the same to his subordinates. Ding! Paul Lane Leave 43 has been killed. You have gained experience. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now Leave 30. Ding! You have completed the quest the next level 5. You have earned new system rights. Ding! You have received a follow-up quest the next level 6. Ding! You have received the divine blessing of Hephaestus, the lame god. Check your status window. Ding! You have received the divine blessing of Hades, the host of many. Check your status window. Ding! You have received the divine blessing of Seth, Lord of the Redlands. Check your status window. Chapter 192. Blessed by the Gods. Seth was close to leave 30. Burning down the base with almost 50 people had brought him to the cusp of leave 29. Now he was watching the ruffians slowly bleeding out after Evie had stabbed them over and over. Just as the first one died, he leveled up and was swept away by a flood of messages. A bright golden light was engulfing him as he received one blessing after another. Hephaestus, the Olympian god of blacksmiths and craftsmen, has gazed upon you and blessed you with some of his own power. The trait Olympian myths has been created. The skills Lame Ones Walk leave 1, Crafty Failsafe leave 5 have been received. Dexterity plus 10, Strength plus 10. Ding! You have unlocked new enchantments. Hades, the Olympian god of the underworld, has gazed upon you and blessed you with some of his powers as the god of wealth. The skills Mineral Detection leave 5, Superior Mining leave 5, Earth Affinity leave 5 have been received. Luck plus 5, Personality plus 5. Ding! Your trait Olympian Myths has strengthened. Ding! You have unlocked new enchantments. Seth, the Heliopolitan god of chaos, has gazed upon you and blessed you with some of his powers as the god of storms. The skill Voice of Seth has been received. The blueprint Staff of Seth has been learned. The recipe Bones of Seth has been learned. Personality plus 5, Strength plus 5. Ding! Title, Blessed One gained. The gods are fighting over you. You have blessed by more than one god. Blessings are slightly strengthened. An overload of information was flooding his brain and he hurriedly sat down as the golden light slowly dimmed. He had gained so much stuff in this short moment. Status. Without items. Name, Seth Smith. Mark of Ivisor. Olympian Myth. Blessing, Hades, Hephaestus, Seth. Title, Faster Than the Thought. Level, 30. EXP, 7%. Race, Orihuma. Sex, male. Age 24. Class, Spirit Blacksmith, unique. Affiliation, System Church. Health, 1000/1000. Mana, 480. Strength 94. Dexterity 91. Agility, 64. Intelligence 48. Willpower 81. Endurance 68. Personality 37. Luck 36. Free AP, Attribute Points 24. Free SP, Skill Points 4. Defense. Physical, 254, 204 plus 50, ENDX 3. Magical, 187, 162 plus 25, WILX 2. Fire Immunity. Earth Resistance, 50%. Poison Resistance, 15%. 7% Resistance to Diseases. Skill Window. His status had not changed by a lot, but he remembered a lot of skills being added. Blacksmith, Journeyman, leave 1, 90%. Enchantment, Journeyman, LV2, 12%. Goldsmith, Journeyman, leave 1, 25%. Blacksmith size leave 5. Blueprint, Journeyman, leave 3. Soul Infusion leave 4. Spirit Smithy leave 5. Spirit Capture leave 4. Spirit Forging, Journeyman, leave 3. Crafty Failsafe, passive, leave 5. Orpheus Voice, passive, leave 3. Voice of Seth leave 1. Superior Mining, passive, leave 5. Mineral Detection leave 5. Reinforce, Journeyman, leave 1. Weapon Mastery, Expert, leave 3, 35%. Lame Ones Walk leave 1. Calm Reaction, passive, leave 7. Fear Resistance, passive, leave 8. Poison Resistance, passive, leave 3. Earth Affinity, passive, leave 5. Fire Affection, passive, leave 6. Pyrokinesis, ability, leave 3. Map leave 4. Observation leave 5. Concealment leave 4. Energy Circulation, 2, leave 1. Sewing, beginner, leave 6, 45%. Universal Translation leave max. Compulsive Precognition, ability. Lifestyle Magic leave max. What was going on with these blessings? Even if one became a champion, wasn't there supposed to be only one blessing? And why were they so misfitting? The god of the underworld gave him mining skills, the god of blacksmiths gave him a movement skill and the god of chaos gave him recipes? Seth had no idea what was going on anymore. Are you okay? Evie asked the stupefied blacksmith in a slight panic. Oh, yeah. Are you sure? You suddenly lit up like a firework and then just stood there for a while. Just a bunch of blessings coming in. Blessings? Tekker asked surprised. The party had been cleaning up what was left of the bandit base. They had returned just in time to overhear their conversation. Blessing? Did you reach level 30, Seth? Allison asked curiously. Yes, why do you ask? Wow, to reach level 30 and immediately become a champion. That really cool. Link interjected. It became clear what they were talking about when he checked the system privileges. The quest to reach level 30 had made him eligible to be chosen as a god's champion. But he had received blessings from 3 different gods. The party looked puzzled when he described what had happened. None of them were champion, so they had no idea how it was supposed to be. But this was the first time they heard that someone was chosen by more than one god. Yeah, it's weird, but what did you actually gain? Champions with one god are already totally overpowered. With 3 blessings, you must have gotten a tremendous power-up. Link said eagerly. Seth belatedly looked at the list of skills he had received. Superior mining and mineral detection were rather self-explanatory. Earth affinity was the same as fire affinity had been. It granted resistance and increased power to earth element skills and enchantments. The blessing of Hephaestus was a bit more interesting. Crafty failsafe leave 5, passive/active. A skill that automatically puts a failsafe into crafted items that prevent them from being used against the creator. LV.5 effects. Items used against their creator lose all enchantments and only show 50% of their original performance. Requirement: item has to be crafted yourself. Lame One's Walk, passive, no cost. A movement technique created by God Hephaestus himself. Motivated by his own handicap, he created a technique to move in the smithy with unnatural speed. Unlike what his looks may suggest, the lame god is among the fastest moving gods of Olympia. The first one made sense to be a blessing by the god of blacksmiths. A skill that weakens the power of one's own weapons if used against oneself. But the movement skill? Concentrating on the walking technique. Seth's mind was filled with the basic knowledge of how to execute the skill. The skill had a lot to do with precise body control and a special way to circulate one's mana while following the steps. Using this skill would make it seem like Seth was limping and slow to an onlooker, betraying the actual speed and range of his movement. I seemed like an unexpectedly good addition to Seth's fighting skills. The voice of Seth did not look like much at first glance, but his opinion changed when he read the description. Voice of Seth, active, cost 25 mana/minute. Infusing your voice with the magic of Seth will enable you to manipulate whoever listens. Charm, seduce, incite, appease, appall, provoke, motivate, demoralize and convince the other. No matter what words are spoken, they will have your desired effect. Effects correspond to differences in level and depend on personality and skill level. This skill sounded truly terrifying. It was not just manipulating people with words, but with intent. He could greet someone completely normal but provoke him with the greeting as if he had cursed his mother. In the right hands, this skill could raise nations or destroy them. Seth realized this, but he also knew that his were the wrong hands. He simply lacked any interest in conquest or domination. But it was a neat skill for him as someone who often had problems articulating his intent. He roughly summed up his gains as he talked with the party. The other had complicated looks on their faces. "What's up with you guys and those constipated faces?" Seth asked confused. Evie didn't really understand what this was about and also looked at the other 3. The 3 kept quiet in an awkward silence until Allison couldn't take it anymore. "To begin with, I'm not saying those skills are not good, okay? It's just, are you sure you got blessed? Normally a champion would become overwhelmingly powerful. I'm sorry, but compared to what we heard about the powers of champions, these skills are a scam." "A joke? Skills? Oh, I also got some enchantments, recipes, and a trait. Give me a second." He was not really bothered by what Allison had said. Olympian myth, trait. This trait signifies your connections to the myths and legends of Olympus. Currently, Hades, strong, Hephaestus, medium strong. May unlock class and skill-related information corresponding to the existing connections. What exactly this meant became clear to Seth when he took a look at his enchantment catalog. He remembered that the notifications he had gotten after receiving the trait. There were two new categories, which were Olympian enchantments and underworld enchantments. He was almost happy if they were not grayed out with everything except the titles unreadable. It said that his level in enchantment was too low. Seth guessed that they would unlock bit by bit as long as he leveled the skill. When he looked at the blueprint of Staff of Seth, he found another row of blueprints grayed out and unreadable. This time it was his blacksmithing that was not up to par. But he found the staff. It was a was scepter. Except for the material requirement, there was nothing difficult about this weapon. The material needed to make this staff were of course the bones of Seth. He looked it up in his material catalog and found the recipe, which was quite mystical and not very scientific. Bones of Seth were rated between rare and legendary. It could be refined from ordinary iron. To refine it, one needed to draw a formation with the blood of a jackal and a donkey. The formation would need to be infused with mana during the 6th hour of the day. The better the quality of the material, the higher the success chance and resulting rating. This was one of the first recipes Seth saw that sounded like true magic. And it didn't end there. He found that another recipe was added to the catalog, Olympian silver. This material could be refined from ordinary silver and was also rated rare to legendary. The refinement method sounded just as magical but was totally different. To create Olympian silver, one needed to smelt silver in a special furnace using the heat of an active volcano while following a special energy circulation technique to infuse power into the metal. It was pretty obvious that the latter was unlocked through his new trait and was the metal Hephaestos mostly used to create many of his divine armaments. It was true that he had not gotten a great immediate power boost, but looking at these gains made him look forward to the future. Chapter 193. On the way back. Boss? Link asked carefully after Seth had stiffened with a weird expression on his face. Were Allison's words too harsh? Oh, sorry. I spaced out for a moment. Hehe, you may think I got scammed on this one, but just you wait and see. You will understand in the future, just how unfair this blessing is. Seth was right, except for the fact that he himself still not understood how unfair this blessing really was. The others just looked at him weirdly. He harumphed and changed the subject. Anyway, I guess we are finished here. Let's go back to Evie's base and prepare for the way back. There were still about 50 bandits scattered across the ruins, but they did not have to hunt those down. Evie would cancel all her wards after leaving. The bandits would have no choice but to try and return to the slums or die out here. The latter had a higher chance of happening. It was still dark when they returned to the girls' hideout, and they decided to have a good rest before returning. The gourmet hunter meticulously prepared a great meal before they went to sleep. The wards really showed their usefulness. It was the first party since they left the safety zone that the whole party could get a good night's sleep. Not only did the wards repel monsters, but they could also warn them, if something managed to enter the perimeter. In the morning Seth was woken up by a small rough tongue licking his face. When he drowsily opened his eyes, he looked into another pair of big green eyes that stared at his face. A cat, he thought, still not quite away. No, this was no cat. Wasn't it a little too big? As he slowly woke up, his thoughts became clearer. The size of a dog, a lynx or a bobcat. He had never heard of black bobcats. It looked much more like a normal cat with the size cranked up. He cupped its head in his hand and rubbed the soft fur. It was very tame as it closed its eyes and enjoyed being petted. How did it come to this? He sat there early in the morning, petting some strange big cat that had woken him up. Seth heard a chuckle from the door and saw Evie hiding at the door frame. Is this your doing? He asked and gestured at the cat, without taking his hands off the purring furball. It turned out that Seth was not the only one who had gained a lot from their little killing spree. While the others had leveled up or were close to a level up, Evie had the greatest gains. She had jumped straight past Leave 15 and unlocked several witch skills. Among them was Familiar. For Evie, the Petsy stem was unlocked at Leave 15 instead of Leave 20, and the reason was this skill. As a witch, she obviously needed a familiar. For this, she had an additional pet space for her familiar. This gave her the ability to have two creatures to assist her in combat, her familiar and a pet. Normal people like Seth could only have one pet and a mount. The difference between a mount and a pet was simple. A mount would only defend itself in a fight. It would not fight for its contractor and could refuse to come out during a fight. A big difference between familiars and pets was that they would not die. Even if they were defeated in combat, they would only return to the pet space and recover. If Puffles was killed in a battle, there would be no return for it. Evie had already checked her skills yesterday and held back from testing them. But she could not hold back from testing it after waking up early. She had drawn a magic circle with mana and mumbled some cryptic spells. The result was said to be totally random. There was no way to control what familiar a witch would summon with this spell. Evie was very happy when it was a beautiful big black cat that appeared from the magic circle. Since it was early in the morning, she decided to play a prank on Seth to surprise him. While Seth was still petting the fluffy familiar, she explained the other perks. A familiar would not only be able to fight alongside its summoner without the risk of permanent death. It could also grow on its own by defeating and devouring enemies. And she could upgrade the familiar's power the more the skill itself grew. As she bragged about her new skill and powers, it started to sound more and more like a sales pitch. Seth had already planned to count her to his people, so it was quite funny to see her so eager to join his party. Looking at her skills, Seth could not help but think that witches were a really rounded class. They could cast spells for attack, brew potions for buffs, and had a familiar for defense. "You guys are already up? Oh, who is this little fur buddy?" Tecker asked, surprised when he saw the familiar on Seth's lap. He had come by the door and happened to look inside. He joined Seth in pampering the big cat. A little later, after Evie unsummoned her familiar to save it from being rubbed by 4 people at once, everyone got ready to leave. Seth had given Evie a set of simple armor, one of those he had prepared for the auction, before they left. On the way back to Y City they decided to not be as quiet as they were on the way here. They wanted to gain some levels and gather some more materials. They put Evie into an armor to protect her since she had such a low level at the moment. With Evie's scouting with astral projection they not only easily avoided stronger monsters while committing genocide on weaker ones, but they could also have a good rest during the night thanks to her wards. Evie's ward also opened up a way to complete Seth's plan idea of having the mobs fight each other. "I just needed some ward to attract and confuse the mobs to have them enter each other's territories and fight." While several monster tribes had suddenly fallen into an all-out war, the party sat on a nearby roof waiting for a chance. As orcs were wrestling with lizardmen and kobolds were furiously ripping apart goblins, Allison used the chaos to cast a fire rain over all of them. This was not meant to be any kind of finisher but a way to steal some experience. In the chaos neither side could tell who had cast the fire and it just provoked them even more. And every time they killed each other the party got some experience thanks to the damage Allison dealt. After most of them died or were severely wounded, the party swooped in to finish off all the remnant and harvest the loot. The materials could be sold, but they were all at most uncommon. On the other hand, the material Seth did appreciate and collect were steel and precious metals from the ruins. Now that he had recipes to refine iron and silver, he could not miss out on free resources. By the time they reached the slums their inventories were packed to the brim with stuff. But in the end, the biggest gain was still the experience, as everyone leveled up and Tecker even reached level 40. Evie was given a free bus ride and she reached Leave 26 while her familiar was close to Leave 20. But no matter how fast the familiar grew, it could not keep up with his Puffles. Puffles had not only reached Leave 33 like himself but also kept growing without stop. Puffles also became quite ravenous, swallowing everything that was left of monsters after Link had dismantled them. Seeing those changes, Seth guessed that Puffles might be close to another metamorphosis. Would he learn to make an even better thread? How was Seth supposed to sustain this glutton? The celestial bronze already needed several different rare materials and they had needed to visit a bazaar to find them, as the Eyevisor itself did not know which materials it needed. Mentioning those materials, Seth's stock of those was also dwindling. He had made Puffles produce celestial bronze non-stop, so he could send it to Naddle at some point. There was no way to restock those on Earth. "You there! Stop right there! Who do you think you are, that you simply cross the Shield Gang's territory?" Chapter 194. The Index. 3 people were leisurely sitting in the front row of what looked like a home theater. A few others were sitting in the seat behind, but only their silhouettes were visible. This was the solution of the 3, Hades, Hephaestus, and Seth. Instead of showing the other gods' clips one by one, they sold tickets for their theater where they played the highlights of Seth's adventures. On the screen was the scene of Seth's attack on the bandit base. Unnoticed by the guards, the hunter had quietly spread accelerant around the bandit base and the barricades. All Seth then needed to do was light it with his powerful spirit flame. The terrifying fire surrounded the base in the blink of an eye. Allison cast a storm wind to further stoke the fire before she continued to cast the fire rain. In the meantime, Seth had prepared an escape route out of the encirclement. At the end of the route waited his summoned smithy, aka his workshop. Here Cerberus was already ready to give their guests a heartfelt welcome and a big hug. Seth wanted to capture them alive, so Evie could have her revenge. During the best part, when Seth received their blessings, the door to the home theater flew open. It might be more accurate to say that the two wings of the door exploded and flew into the theater. Seth! Where are you? You mutt! An angry voice echoed. It was a featureless god in a funny-looking wizard robe that had entered the room. System god! Why are you here? Seth asked, shocked. The other gods in the room had hurried to vanish. Only the three entrepreneurs were still in the theater. I said clearly nothing from your specialty. What's with that voice skill? What do you mean? I'm mainly the god of chaos, destruction, and violence. Giving him the voice of a storm god should not be a problem, right? Don't think you can fuck with me. That voice skill is clearly of chaotic nature. So what? I'm the god of chaos, of course, I cheat. The blessing is given. There is nothing you can do about it now. The two Olympian gods backed away from Seth as they felt the system god's anger bend time and space around him. The system god raised his threatening index, and at this moment this finger seemed to grow in presence while everything else darkened. As if this was the only object in the universe. Seth could not help but sweat buckets, but he stood his ground. Then everything returned to normal, and the index was slowly lowered. The system god did not need violence, Seth was used to beatings. There were more painful means. Yeah, the blessing is given, and I won't take it away. But don't think there is no punishment. No private champion for you. Hehe, this third of a champion is all you will ever have on earth. How do you like that? The system god said, full of schadenfreude. Seth's face fell. You can't do this. Ha! I can, and I did. That's your punishment. Oh yeah, and you. The terrifying index was suddenly pointing at Hephaestus' forehead. Thin line. Very thin line, my friend. Hephaestus, the crafty one, don't think you can mess with me. With that the system god left the theater as suddenly as he had entered it, leaving behind two gods dripping with sweat. The only one still calmly sitting on his seat was Hades. The other two looked at him hatefully when they heard him rummaging in his popcorn. He only gave them a contemptuous smile. I always play by the rules, he said with a smirk, and ate some popcorn. It was true, Hades had not tried to circumvent the rules, instead, he gave their champion the probably strongest blessing. The skills themselves might not have been too special, but the point was the level. With the skills given by Hades, the little blacksmith would be able to find and harvest even epic materials. If this wasn't the most useful and powerful blessing for the current Seth, then what was? The street was blocked by 3 people, while 5 more were in the surrounding building and aimed their bows at them. What's the shield gang? Are you highwayman or something? Tecker mumbled unwittingly. Don't call us that. We are fair and just businessmen. We keep this road clean and safe, so you have to pay a highway tax for using it. That's not unreasonable. Yeah, it isn't, one of the 3 confirmed. So, you are a kind of militia? Seth asked. Militia? Hey Tom, what's a militia? Are we a militia? I don't know, Jim. We should ask Papa later. Tom, Jim, Sam. Stop wasting time, one of the archers shouted. He wore a pair of small circular shades and slurred the end of the words. Archie, is that you? The gourmet hunter suddenly called out. What? The archer lifted his shades to get a better look at the travelers. Link? The heck are you doing here? Didn't you become some big shot in the city or something? He said and lowered the bow. Guys, lower the weapons. I know that guy. No need to fight. He put away the bow and jumped down to the street and greeted the hunter with a bear hug. Archie, I didn't see you ever since the war. Why are you living in the slums? Come on, Link. Not everyone can have a super cool class and make it in this world. You know me, also this is dangerous, it's a simple life, he answered and patted his shoulder. Anyway, how about we talk at our hideout? Don't worry about these guys, they are actually more or less okay. Link gave Seth a questioning look. The other just shrugged his shoulders and they followed Link's friend to the gang's base. On the way, Link told him that he knew Arca from the time before the apocalypse. He had no problem telling them that he was involved in some shady stuff. Times were tough back then. It was a block of 4 barricaded buildings making up the gang's hideout. Unexpectedly, it was not an ambush. Women and children were living in this stronghold and going about their daily life. They saw people tending to gardens and washing clothes. It was a really rustic picture of society. Tom, Jim, Sam. Why are you bringing in people again? You were supposed to find food or money. Not more mouths to feed. A grumpy older man with a big unkempt beard was standing in their way and scolding his 3 sons. Papa, are we militia or highwaymen? Jim suddenly asked. What the heck are you talking about? You know what? Just be silent. Archibald, what is this? Who are these people? Boss. They are friends of an old friend. This is Link. We were partners before the fall. He introduced them to the boss of the stronghold, Bart. They were no dangerous criminals. At his place were mostly people that ran away from something. Debts, the law, oppression, or simply the old life. They were a little like settlers. They had conquered a piece of land for themselves and lived by their own rules in this place. Seth could feel the romance of simple life, but he wasn't tempted. He was a child of the city and civilization. Bart invited them for lunch. It was a rather meager meal, not just compared to Seth's usual portions, but also compared to a normal-sized meal. He had obviously not managed to control his expression completely. I apologize, but we are a little hard-pressed when it comes to food. Our farms are not big enough to sustain us completely, and the ruins are more or less cleaned of rations in this area. All we can do is ask travelers for kind donations. Seth felt a little bad for these people. As someone who appreciated good and big meals, seeing people starve touched him. Link was also throwing glances at him as if he wanted to say something. They had a lot of meat in their inventories. But Seth was not touched enough to simply donate their hard-earned spoils. But he had an idea. Chapter 195. Goodies on the way. Boss Bart, don't you people hunt the beasts around here for safety reasons? Don't you harvest them for meat? Of course, we do. Our hunters are actually quite good at their job. But it's simply not enough to get by, he lamented. Then what are you doing with the other materials? Can't you sell those for money? Bart heaved a big sigh at that question. Most of us can't show our face in the city, how would we sell this much? Even if we managed to sell the stuff, there is a high risk of our people being robbed on the way back. We have no choice but store most of it in the unused rooms, he shrugged helplessly. This was what Seth wanted to hear. It was even better than he had expected. The party had many stacks of just meat clogging up their inventory. It was a lot more than Link would need. Since proficiency would slowly decrease if one did the same thing over and over again, they just needed to keep part of the different meats. Trading the food for the material would help the stronghold without anyone losing out. It was a win-win situation. He discussed this idea with the other, with Link being an avid supporter. The others also readily agreed. Y-City had no problem with the food supply. Crafting materials, on the other hand, were always in demand. After speaking about it with his party, Seth suggested the deal to Bart. The leader of the stronghold happily agreed to trade the direly need food for the materials that were slowly gathering dust in their storerooms. He led them to one of the 4 buildings that was mostly used for storage. It was the sturdiest of the 4 buildings and doubled as a keep. If they were ever overrun, this would be the place they would entrench themselves. Bart proudly told them that his oldest son, Lom, was an enchanter and had further fortified this building. It had even withstood a band of Tauren warriors that had once invaded from a portal. He didn't go too much into the details, but he mentioned that they had also prepared some means to escape in an emergency. Like a tour guide, he kept talking about the place as he led them to the storerooms. The rooms were packed with neat wooden boxes that all looked the same. He mentioned that his daughter's husband had the carpenter class and made all the boxes and shelves. Seth knew about carpenters, but he never met one. Besides stuff like furniture, low-level carpenters were also the people making stuff like the ready-made spear and arrow shafts. The storage was well sorted with several rooms of common materials for all kinds of crafting professions. The next floor had some room with boxes full of uncommon materials. They now had 2 people who would have a use for alchemical materials in the future. Evie, who had the brewing skill of a witch, and Allison, who was working hard on acquiring the alchemy skill. Seth left the choice of materials to those 2. Although Allison had not yet acquired the skill, she had already studied the alchemy books at the church and roughly knew what she was doing. Her memory was something that scared Seth. Evie had the eyes of the witch, which allowed her to identify and judge occult and mystic materials or items. A door at the end of the hallway on the 2nd floor piqued Seth's interest. It looked a lot sturdier than the others and had an additional padlock. What's in there? Bart scratched the back of his head a little embarrassed. It's stuff we couldn't appraise. Some of it we locked it up because we thought it would be very valuable. But there are also some dangerous things we put in there for safety reasons. Since we don't really know what the things are or can, we put them away until someone can appraise them. If they were able to separate the common and uncommon items, so the stuff in there was at least rare. Now Seth really wanted to take a look. Would you let me have a look? My skills are pretty good, I can appraise blacksmithing materials up to the epic level. I can also offer you better stuff than just food. I bet you have some use for better gear, he asked and tried using his new skill to be more convincing. This wasn't all. Seth also had Al's also with her max level appraisal. Maybe they had something good in store and he could really profit? Bart was deliberating for a moment before he nodded. He unlocked the door and let Seth enter the treasury. The room was emptier with small chests and boxes neatly organized on tables and shelves. There was also creepy-looking organic stuff in glass jars on one shelf. The rows of jewelry chests on tables and some bigger boxes on the floor were Seth's first stop. He avoided the glass jar stuff. Ah, don't touch it. That one's dangerous. Seth had opened a red lacquered box with a big orb inside. Storm Sphere, crafting material. Rare. Mag damage, 900. Durability, 1000. 1 plus 800 lightning damage. 2 plus 500 wind damage. 3 plus 50% magic damage. 4 15% chant reduction. 5 Curse of the Storm. The Eye of a Lightning Bird refined into a crystal sphere with unknown means by Arch-Enchanter Muland. The item is filled with an uncontrollable amount of wind and lightning energy. Usage requirements, Leave 40, Intermediate Lightning Magic, 30% Lightning Affinity 20% Wind Affinity. Anyone who directly touched it got hit by a strong electric shock. Some people almost died to it. Seth explained to him that this was the effect of the Curse of the Storm. Whoever touched it without meeting the requirements would hit by a lightning discharge. Bart explained that it had been the main weapon of the Tauren mage that was part of the group that had attacked them. It was an item and also counted as a crafting material since it could also act as the focus for a staff. The other rare weapon was a bone sword that could only be wielded by a Leave 30 plus Tauren warrior. The rest of the items were mostly cursed junk. Cursed junk was the slang for blanks that could be dropped in a dungeon. They often had terrible curses and little use. It was one of the risks of dungeoneering. One would fight through a huge number of monsters and terrible traps and end up with junk because the items created by the dungeon were more or less random. This didn't mean they were useless, but the effort needed to make use of them was often not worth the result. The best use was to give them to an enchanter. A high-ranked enchanter could recycle these items. He listened to his private lich when it came to other items in the room, but they were of little interest to Seth or the party. The biggest surprise held a chest that had been put under one of the tables. Inside were shards of dark turbid glass ranging from black over dark brown to green. There were 50 or 60 stones in the chest. Volcanic glass, crafting material, rare. Naturally occurring obsidian that has been soaked in the power of a dragon vein. The natural flow of magic power has kindled and strengthened the natural properties of the obsidian. It has a high affinity with earth and fire attributes. Among the obsidian pieces, there were also a few that were different from the rest. Dragon glass, crafting material, rare plus. Naturally occurring obsidian that has been soaked in the power of a dragon vein. The natural flow of magic power has kindled and strengthened the natural properties of the obsidian. It has a high affinity with earth and fire attributes. Dragon glass was exposed to strong natural magic, giving it an additional high magic conductivity and affinity with the world mana. Chapter 196. Goodies on the way, too. Wow, where did you get these? Seth asked excitedly. Materials with an affinity to fire and earth were great stuff for him. It was a shame that obsidian was very fragile, unlike the fire glass he had used for his cuirass. This meant that these materials were more suited to be used in jewelry, than as armor or weapons. Of course, he could also use them as nuclei for enchantments on weapons or armor. Those were mostly needed as a power source for semi-permanent enchantments. Seth did never have a need to use this method, since it was mostly to hike up the price, in his opinion. He admitted that semi-permanent enchantments were better for regular adventurers, but as the person making the items, it was a waste of time. Even without this method, Seth never had a problem selling his items, and he himself had no need for it since he had soul infusion. Nonetheless, he could make some great jewelry from this obsidian, and maybe he could use some of them in the items for the auction later on when the average item quality rose. It was a cheap way to make a rare rated item, and here were a lot of obsidian shards. One of my cousins is a miner. He was part of a scavenger squad looking for rations when they came across a giant battlefield. It must have been a fearsome fight between giant beasts. He described the buildings were toppled and crushed. The ground was turned upside down with deep trenches and holes everywhere. He found these with mineral detection. At that time, they were scattered all over the place. Seth was not a scammer, so he truthfully relayed what these obsidian shards were to Bart. If it's true what you say, then the fight must have crushed some ore vein. Hehe, even if he had found the vein, there's no way he would have been able to mine it. I saw the light in your eyes. Do you want these? Yeah, but I don't think I can give you anything that rivals their worth. Even so, these shards were good. Seth was not really willing to part with anything rare rated he made himself. It would break the balance too easily and fasten the progression of others. On the other hand, offering them money or system money also made little sense, since they had no possibility to use it. What can you offer us? Seth contemplated and offered them all the loot from the bandits they killed. There were a lot of good common and uncommon items among these. At least good enough that Seth thought of selling them in the city. He didn't consult the others this time, as this was merely a question of money. Seth brought out several boxes holding the armor, weapons, and accessories they had looted from the bandits and their base. It was no small amount, but for Seth, their value was vanishingly small compared to a full box of rare minerals. Bart's eyes widened when he saw all the items Seth offered for the box of glass shards. He had heard what Seth had told him, but to him, they were still relatively useless glass shards. Where would he get someone that could process them? But here his trading partner offered him a whole armory of supposedly good equipment for it. This was a fantastic deal in his eyes. The power boost this would give their stronghold would permanently improve their living conditions and chances of survival in case of an emergency. Bart reined in his enthusiasm. He sent for someone who could appraise the items, to make sure they were real. Seth nodded to show that he was not offended. It took only a short while for someone to arrive. This is my cousin Art, short for Arthur. His class is trader, so he has a universal appraisal skill. Art nodded as a greeting. He was not a man of many words as he immediately started checking the gear. He may not speak a lot, but his expression easily betrayed his thoughts, when he looked at the items. The trader confirmed that they were all common or uncommon items with mediocre to good effects across the board. Bart could not hide the twinkle in his eyes as he hurriedly sealed his deal with Seth. Seeing the others so happy, he had no scruples about this deal and stashed away the box of obsidian. In the box were roughly 50 pieces of volcanic glass and 15 pieces of dragon glass. It was a shame that he could not make pure armor out of these, but they would definitely turn into some great items in his hands. At the thought of making some great items, he remembered something. Oh yeah, would you be willing to give me that storm orb? I could offer you these. He brought out the boots and greaves he had made to wear before he ended up making his disruptor boots. As Art was unable to appraise them, it was clear that these were also rare items. When Seth explained to them the basic enchantments of agility and endurance plus 35 each, their eyes went wide. Although it would cost them mana to activate, it was a tremendous boost. It was a phenomenal deal for the stronghold. They switched a ball that only hurt people for some boots and greaves that could be used ASIS. Seth packed away the red box with the orb. And thus, their deal was concluded. The stronghold's people had gotten a massive power-up. With these items, they could equip all their fighting personnel and resist even stronger monsters. And the party had gotten a truckload of more materials to train alchemy, brewing and even cooking. Seth still needed some time to come up with a plan for what he would use the obsidian, but he already knew what to do with the sphere. The important part of the sphere's description was that it was not only a finished item but also a crafting material. Seth could use this orb as the nucleus of staff for Allison. A mean one at that. They stayed in the stronghold for a night before setting off again. Link had asked Evie to set up wards before they left, but the party decided against it. Learning from Evie's experiences, it was not a good idea to own the only safe zone in a lawless monster-ridden world. At least not, if you lacked the strength to defend it. They entered the Great Highway again and had a more or less quiet journey back to civilization, and they soon met up again with the mercenaries from the church. It looked like they had no trouble staying at the edge of the safe zone for the week the party was away. But everyone was happy to finally return as the party entered the wagon and they got on their way back. The party mostly slept on their way back. Not to mention Seth and the others who had kept running around for several days. Evie, who had not slept for almost a year, had a lot of sleep to catch up on. Chapter 197. The present. The group of Twathada reached the roof of the building. They knew there had been people until just moments ago, but they somehow vanished. Had they jumped dimensions? Their leader, a young man approaching the 400 cycles, 450 years, was grasping in the air while mumbling a spell. There are definitely signs of spatial magic. To be able to do this without the magic of the fog, it must have been a terrifying druid or shaman to cast this spell. They investigated the roof but could not find anything else out of the ordinary. It was only when they tried to leave the roof when they noticed that their way back was blocked. A red transparent membrane of magic was blocking their exit. It only became visible once they touched it. And in the same breath, the rest of the membrane was exposed. The whole roof was surrounded by a bubble of transparent red power looking flimsy to the eyes, but sturdy to the touch. The magic caged them on the rooftop. Neither magic nor physical force could break this alien spell, and after several hours of trying to escape, they came to a horrifying realization. It was the innocent question of a tired warrior who suddenly asked, "Hey, Iak, doesn't this barrier seem to shrink?" In the beginning, the barrier encased the whole rooftop, but when they checked it, the rim and balustrade were now outside of the magic wall. The space was really shrinking, and the walls were moving closer. They were almost 20 people, and with the speed the walls were closing in, they would become paste in less than 2 days. Horror filled their hearts and panic their minds. They had already tried everything they could. There was no way out. Silence. Everyone doesn't lose hope. The other groups will soon come looking for us if we don't return. Maybe they can do something from the outside, the leader spoke up. After his speech, most of them somewhat calmed down. The leader was right. Maybe this spell was only strong from the inside. The others might be able to break it from the outside. With some hope, they waited for their companions to find and save them. Soon the scouts of other groups had found them. At this point, the magic barrier was clearly recognizable as a cube. The captured glow people inside were already huddling together in fear. Not only were the walls coming closer, but they also became less and less transparent. They were slowly turning into solid crimson walls. Outside, their comrades tried everything they could to break this vicious barrier. But even with a spell using the combined chanting of all 50 of them, they were unable to break it. Of course, this was what Alzalsa wanted to begin with. This was her present, how could others break her spell? All the ones outside could do was watch the horrible spectacle happen. As the walls closed in, the people inside could not help but cry and scream. They begged for their life with tears and snot staining their beautiful faces. They hammered with their hands against the walls and begged the onlookers to do something. And soon the cries and screams turned from those of panic into those of pain. As they were slowly crushed against each other, and their armors and weapons dug into each other's flesh. Raw animalistic screams echoed into the fog as the cube shrunk more and more, crushing the people inside. These were scenes and cries that would haunt them in their darkest nightmares. The feeling of helplessness as they watched their friends and colleagues die in such a way. The screams fell silent one by one as those inside lost their lives. The walls now had turned opaque and crimson red. They no longer saw what was going on, and only the sound of breaking bones and crunching flesh escaped from the red box. There was no way they would ever forget this sound. This was far above and beyond anything Seth had imagined when he said to leave them a present. He had thought of a bomb or a curse or something. The 200-year-old lich on the other hand decided on a psychological trauma for those left behind. It kept shrinking down to the size of a small package. It stopped shrinking, ribbons and the rim of a top appeared. It was a present. A small crimson-red present filled with the crushed and compressed remains of the comrades. Many of those that had watched this spectacle had already run away when they could not take it anymore. Only the commander of the search team and some of those with a stronger stomach were left to look at this present. They were shell-shocked and only managed to move after staring at the present for several hours. The first thing they did was not approach the present but empty their stomachs over the rim of the building. In all their long lives they had never seen something so cruel. Whoever was responsible needed to be punished. Disturbed but determined, the commander took the heavy present. They immediately returned to the royal capital to report. Seeing their pale faces and listening to their reports, the decisions fell fast. Their High King would not tolerate the existence of someone so abominable. Especially not after killing over 20 of his people. No matter how often hostile creatures invaded their world through the fog, they seldomly saw the need to retaliate. The best druid was sent to analyze the remnant of spatial magic and find a way to follow those fiends. It took a week for the druid to reverse engineer the magic and the destination. In the meantime, the subjugation force that would pursue the fiends was already prepared and on standby. Under the royal edict's orders, the druid opened a fog portal for their warrior to invade this different world. The disciplined troop of elites crossed the fog and entered the field of canyons on the other side. It looked not much different from the region in their world. The canyons and pillars were filled with ugly goblins, but the air in this place was filled with several times the amount of magic. They felt as if they were bathing in a dragon vein. The crowd of goblins that filled the canyon was split into two kinds. Some stood still and stared at their beautiful faces, dumbfounded. The other half had fled the moment they saw these alien warriors stepping out of the void. Decisively, the leader grabbed the head of one of the petrified goblins and used a spell to search for information. The creature struggled and screamed with tears, snot, and drool covering its face. The commander showed mercy as he extracted the information and absorbed the thing's life force. Its body shriveled up and its life ended just like that. He gathered that this was a giant city that had recently gone through some kind of catastrophe. There were still several hundreds of millions of enemies, but their power was puny at best. Originally without any magic at all, this world has recently been connected to the pathworks and the natives had just started growing. His judgment was that there were no creatures that could stop their search. Numbers did not matter before overwhelming power. He snapped his fingers and his army of 150 elite fighters dispersed to look for clues. All of them wore crystal talismans that could detect the magic signature of the people that had left this present. The piercing sound of alarm sirens filled the city, signaling the citizens to stay inside. A group of unidentified humanoids had invaded the city and had spread out in the streets. Mark Baker was sitting in his brand new office and massaging his temples. Why did this have to happen right after he got the responsibility for this kind of situation? From the reports, it seemed like they were looking for something. Sometimes they would stop moving and stare at their equipment. They would also randomly grab a person and turn them into a desiccated corpse. Observational skills did not work on them, and if they noticed the skill, they would kill the user. Judging from their physical performance, they were equal to a level 45 swordsman without equipment. Their arcane skills could not be judged at this point. A crowd of them was encircling the system church for some reason but did not dare to get closer than 10 meters to the building. Aside from the church were 4 more places they were gathering at. A residential area, an old library, the red light district, and the Hunters Association. They did not know what was going on, but they had to do something to stop it. They already mobilized the Hunters, the Adventurers Guild, and the big guilds to deal with the gathering spots. But there were still close to 100 humanoids running through the streets wreaking havoc. Mark had no choice but to release their secret forces prematurely. It was the only way to save their citizens. Chapter 198. Return to sender. He was on his way home from work at the convenience store when he heard the shrill sound of the alarm sirens. He looked around and followed the signs to the next shelter. Soon he was in a crowd of people flowing towards the shelter. He saw nothing but suddenly heard screams from the front. At the entrance to the shelter stood a celestial beauty. His gaze is pulled to her. Platinum blonde, long hair, eyebrows, and prominent eyelashes. Her pale skin was as fair as jade. The crowd was spellbound. The vivid red splatters of blood on her soft skin and the cold gaze in her clear blue eyes broke his fascination. Only in a second glance did he take in the full scope of this morbid scene. His eyes followed the tight black leather armor drenched in blood down to 2 vicious-looking daggers in her hands. She was surrounded by a pool of blood and severed body parts in the middle of the dense crowd, right before the entrance to the shelter. In one moment, there were people, and in the next, there was a crop circle of harvested lives. He had to run. It was his only thought, but his body wouldn't move. He was only a Level 9 merchant, and his attribute points were concentrated on willpower and intelligence. There was no way he could fight that. Only a few people around him seemed to have escaped the charm effect, but they were still bound and could only look around, not move. They were done for. The woman mumbled something in a harmonious language and stabbed her dagger into the ground. The blood on the ground turned into a magic circle and then into a black abyss. A swarm of giant rats started jumping out of the portal onto the street. The appearance of the beasts betrayed the sound of her chant. Disgusting mutants the size of a dog with tumorous growths, crimson glowing eyes, and rows of terrifying teeth started attacking the helpless citizens. Jumping with incredible speed, they easily ripped at the throats of their unmoving victims and gorged themselves on the soft flesh. Only when they were ripped apart by their bestial fangs, did many people come to their senses. They screamed in pain and panic, but it was already too late for them. He could only stand there, watch and wait for his turn as the swarm grew and massacred its way towards him. He had already given up on life when a bright light blinded him, and he felt the invisible restraints that had held him vanish. Released from the magic, he fell on his butt and started crawling backward. He heard the sounds of fighting, and then he saw dark figures slaughtering the rats and fighting the summoner. They all wore the same surcoats with a big silver 0 embroidered on the back. While he tried to gain distance to the battle, others in the crowd equipped their gear and drew their weapons. Not everyone was as helpless as the merchant. Without the binding spell, they could at least take care of the rat swarm that kept pouring out of the portal. They had not survived the apocalypse and war without reason. Several hundred players of various occupations and levels swarmed against the vermintide, overpowering the demonic creatures in an instant. Justified rage was burning in their eyes as they slaughtered them like animals. Relieved from the burden of dealing with the rat infestation, the party of 5 could concentrate on raiding the mysterious beauty. Her magic was powerful and foreign to the players, but they had learned to deal with powerful and foreign skills in the past months. They were fast and efficient. Cornering the female magician was not a problem with their full party. A troubled expression could be seen on the cold beauty's face as the players kept dodging her spells and attacking her openings. After much back and forth and a lot of property damage, they finally held the severed head of the attacker. With the caster's death, the portal finally closed, and the crowd took care of the remaining beasts. A lot had happened, and it felt like hours to him, but only minutes had passed since the beauty appeared. The figures stored away the head and body and hurried away, leaving the dumbfounded but relieved crowd behind. The first reports are in, sir. A subordinate hurriedly entered the command center. Mark Baker stood at a table bent over a digital map of Y City. His hair was tousled, and dark pit stains could be seen on his white button-up shirt. "How is it?" he asked tiredly. "The Zero squads have encountered their first targets and eliminated them. It is reported that they are tough opponents that need at least a full party to subdue without losses. The civilian casualties are still on the lower side. Not all the targets seem intent on indiscriminate slaughter, sir." Baker fell silent for a moment and looked at the map. Locations where they gathered and points of moving targets that were being tracked filled the screen. Most of them had scattered, giving the Zero squads a chance to take them down one by one. They would most likely not stand a chance if these things were intent on fighting them. They are looking for something. But what, or who? Do we have visuals on their point of entrance? Yes, sir. Here. Currently, it seems like only their leader stayed in place, someone answered. A window opened on the table screen and showed a weathered but still handsome man in dark armor. He suddenly looked straight into the camera and smiled. His lips moved slightly, and the camera picture shut down. "We lost connection, sir." Baker nodded and pondered. "How is the situation at the gathering points?" "Stable, sir," he said, and took a new report given by a messenger. "And the scattered ones?" The subordinate looked at the paper he had just received. 21 confirmed kills, minor losses. The Zeros report that the targets seem to possess the magic to tremendously weaken the opponent. The ones afflicted have pulled back from the fights. Some parties had to regroup. There are roughly 40 still scattered in the city, the rest have flocked to the gathering points. Good. I will go and meet the leader. Maybe he will tell me what they want. Get ready," Baker said determinedly, and the people in the command center nodded grimly. 30 minutes later their preparations were finished. Baker had driven a modified ATV to the entrance point of the invaders, where their leader stood with a straight back and a cold gaze. Mark Baker's figure, now wearing a fresh suit and styled hair, walked toward the assumed to be the enemy leader. "Hello, my name is Mark Baker. Are you the leader of the people currently killing our citizens?" "We are simply returning a present we received from one of your own." "And yes, I am their leader. It was not a very happy present, I fathom. But can't you tell your men to leave the innocent citizens alone?" "No, I will not hinder them to vent their feelings on you vermin until we have found the perpetrator," he said coldly. "So you are not willing to negotiate, I understand," he said with a knowing smile. "Let me tell you a funny story. Just now the last of your men venting his feeling on us vermin lost his life. You are completely alone. I may not know what present you received. But if this is the way you deal with it, then I'm sure you deserved it." "You," in anger the leader slashed out. Faster than the eyes could see, or anyone could react, he had drawn the sword and slashed across the baker's neck, cleanly severing off his head. Or was it? Baker's body twitched like going through a static, but nothing else happened. It was just an illusion. This was Baker's skill as a great illusionist, a rare class. He could make lifelike illusions that could even deceive high-leveled bosses. "You are a feisty one. Let me return your gift back to the sender," the illusion said, and lifted its hand. At that moment the leader felt several auras of killing intent in the surrounding buildings. Did they have archers? He saw the hand fall and wanted to evade it, but it was already too late. The sound of tens of shots echoed between the buildings and the leader was instantly turned into a sieve. The sniper barrels were still fuming with smoke when the dead body hit the floor. Illusion Baker looked down on the corpse for a moment, then he clapped his hands. Okay, since this is over, get the cleanup teams. And get the magicians to find out how they invaded without alarming the early warning systems. I don't want this to happen again. He hoped they could find a countermeasure soon. Baker sighed at the thought that he would have to explain this to the public. Chapter 199. Back home. On the second day of their journey through the safety zone, they saw a huge number of new damages across the city. It seemed like something had happened. Suddenly Seth hurriedly stopped the wagon. The reason was a familiar shine in the ruins of a collapsed building. Soul, big, uncommon, crafting material. What a great find! Was there a recent monster attack? What kind of creatures had attacked while they were away to leave so much damages? The soul obediently floated towards him and entered his inventory. He would have to use it in an item, to find out what abilities it would grant if any. But just a big soul was a big gain, too. On their journey to the center of Y City, this became a common occurrence as Seth picked up another 4 of these souls along the way. As they arrived at the church building, he found another 3 souls close to the entrance. Had the church been sieged by monsters? The church had a system buff that could keep most monsters under the system's influence away. But the church still stood, so Seth did not worry much. Daddy, when they entered the church they heard a high-pitched voice and a tiny creature stormed at them. Tekker's daughter charged into the father's arms and almost toppled him over. Some distance behind her followed Mary and Jane with wry smiles. The little girl had constantly looked outside the window, waiting for her father to come back. When she finally saw him arriving in front of the building, they could not stop her from rushing down to greet him. As Seth and Evie entered the lobby he finally heard a long-awaited ding. Ding! You have completed the quest Wanderer's quest. The Wanderer's soul has been restored and added to your inventory. Finally, the quest requirements were fulfilled. Who would have thought they were so strict? When Seth asked Samuel because of the quest later, the old man conjectured that making sure of her well-being meant not just to get her to safety alive. It also meant to get her into a situation where she had the possibility to lead a life in safety if she chose to. Technically, Evie could join the church and live a peaceful life under its protection. The point was that it was her decision from here onwards. Wanderer's soul, medium, epic, crafting material. The soul of a tenacious wanderer who could not find his way home. His body was broken, but his will never did. An epic soul. This was his first epic soul, he would have to deliberate what he would make from it. But not right now. They had just returned and there was a lot to do and catch up about. The first would be a talk with Evie. He wanted her to join his group as a healer/magician. An immortal healer, how good was that? Then they would have 2 healers that could dabble as damage dealers and tanks. He also waited for the answer from Natal. As good as the 2 gauntlets he had made were, he wanted more. There were also the obsidian shards. The others would also need some time to grind their skills with all the new ingredients they had acquired. As he was thinking of all the stuff that waited to be done, he was interrupted by a jovial voice. Seth. I'm glad you guys made it back safe and sound. Samuel came to greet them with wide open arms. He was sure the old man was only happy that he came in time before the next auction. Seth had kept the box with the auction items in his inventory. He thought at first but then he noticed the dark bags under the old man's eyes. You look tired, Samuel. Did something happen? We saw a lot of new damages in the city. Everyone's gaze was now directed at the old priest. Even Tekker, who had been in his own world with his daughter, looked up. Yes. Do you remember the glowing people you told me when you returned after going missing for a week? Their faces became serious, and Seth nodded. A small army of them attacked Y City. My guess would be that they came looking for you. The old man described what had happened recently and the current emergency state of the city. Their eyes widened when they heard where the Tuathata had flocked to. I don't think the authorities suspect anything, yet. You should be careful for the next few days and stay away from the places you usually go. I think the timing is quite opportune. We have a lot of things to do. I suggest all of you stay at the church for the time being and grind your skills. The journey had brought them a great increase in power, but levels were not everything. Training their skills took priority now, especially Evie and Seth, who gained access to a whole bunch of new ones needed to get accustomed to them. They had more than enough material for Link, Evie, and Allison to train their crafting skills, and there was no need to mention how much Seth had on his plate. And you, Tekker. You can spend your time with your daughter and maybe train with the people of the church. Hearing that he could just stay here for free and spend time with his daughter cast a smile on the big man's face. He really loved his daughter. Samuel's smile was a little complicated when he heard that they would simply hole up in the church. But it was Seth's floor and he paid for it. He could do with the rooms whatever he wanted. His smile became genuine when Seth convinced Tekker, Link, and Evie to also join the church as lay members. They had a small coming home party in the canteen before everyone went to Seth's floor and chose a room. Back alone in his room, Seth sighed. The silence after being with people for so long felt good and weird at the same time. He sat down at his table and wrote down all the things he had to do and wanted to do in the near future. And then he took out the token. He felt like a man who had just written his last will. But it was not that bad, right? I have waited long enough. We are back, now keep your promise. The moment he summoned the spicy sorceress, she pushed him down on his bed. While the others were peacefully sleeping after a long journey and party, Seth had to do steamy stuff. Poor Seth. Chapter 200. Present beyond imagination. It has been 2 weeks since Seth and the party returned. The second auction had been postponed because of the recent invasion. There had been many casualties despite the fast reaction by guilds and authorities. Without the sudden appearance of a mysterious group of high-level players, there would have been even more victims. Although the situation was dealt with, the populace was still high-strung and careful about leaving the house. Many invited VIPs had cancelled their positive answers. So many in fact that it was necessary to postpone the auction until the situation calmed down. The story about the head of the Hunters Alliance facing the enemy leader had already a kind of urban legend. It included the fact that someone had allegedly provoked the invaders first. It was fortunate that no one could connect them with the invasion of the Tuatha. Seth didn't feel guilty or anything, but he was clear of the fact that people might blame them if they knew. And that would be really annoying. He was glad that his party members were of a similar opinion. None of them saw anything wrong with what they had done. It spared Seth from long talks to alleviate someone's bad conscience. In the past 2 weeks since they returned, Seth found the chance to officially invite Evie to stay as a permanent part of their party. After he had explained everything that happened in the Fog Realm and their connection to the recent invasion, she was even more enthusiastic about joining them. Allison had finally gained the alchemy skill. She and Evie spent most of their time in the laboratory grinding their skills with the ingredients they had brought back with them. The result was a huge amount of low-level and failed potions of various kinds accumulating. Allison was actually studying chemistry major before the apocalypse and had gotten a good idea of alchemy after studying the church's library. She was able to stand by Evie's side and help her with her own attempts. But her help could only go so far. The skills of alchemists could be said to be more founded in the realms of science, even with magic. Potion brewing and metallurgy followed a more or less set system. A witched brewing on the other hand was much more occult, being a kind of mixed discipline. Witches and alchemists shared a small pool of basic potions, but a witch's brewing included many potions that integrated all kinds of magic formations, wards, and unpredictable occult items and practices. The effects of such potions varied immensely and were much more varied than those of alchemists. This brought with it a very high failure chance and unpredictable options even on failed potions. Link the gourmet hunter on the other hand made himself useful and took over the management of the canteen, cooking most meals all by himself. If he could level his skill up to adept, he might be able to make uncommon meals as long as the main ingredient was uncommon. God knew he had more than enough uncommon meats and materials from their journey that would help him level up fast. Seth started off his little breaks by recuperating from Al's nightly attack. He found the time to check his mail. The church had delivered one big box for him. Inside he found 2 smaller packages and letters. The smaller package was something soft wrapped in paper and corded with string. It came with a letter from Natal. Dear Seth. I'm glad you didn't forget this old unskilled tailor after returning home. I actually consulted with Master Tord about these gloves, and we hit it off. He also told me about the issue you had with that leather, but I'm sure he will tell you more in his letter. We worked together on these and it was a great opportunity to work together with a master blacksmith and it gave me many insights. This is another favor I have to thank you for. Without you, I would have never made a connection with such a skilled dwarven master. In the package, you will find a new pair of gloves. Your master and I incorporated some of our personal reserves into these and I hope you will like them. The effects and materials aside from the bronze were towards suggestions and I hope you will like them. You can view them as a goodbye present from me and your master toward. Sincerely. Nadal Fadley. Seth's heart raced reading this. An item made by the cooperation of a master blacksmith and a craftsman tailor? He carefully lifted the paper package out of the box and ceremoniously untied the strings. Glove of the Fire Spirit. Set 1/2. Legendary. Physical Def, 1200. Mag Def, 750. Durability, 3500. One item is immune to fire or light damage. 2 plus 150% to the effect of all fire-based skills and abilities. 3 plus 50% cost reduction to all fire-based skills and abilities. 4 plus 50% damage to all light-based attacks. 5 plus 25% mana cost reduction. 6 plus 50 strength, 10m/s. 7 plus 50 endurance, 10m/s. 8 plus 50 willpower, 10m/s. One out of a pair of gloves made by the cooperation between tailor craftsman Nadal and the master blacksmith Tord. The lining made from the soft leather of the underbelly of the fire spirit salamander, fabric weaved from celestial bronze and the added plates made of salamander scales created a pair of gloves with terrifying effects. Set effect. Plus 50% damage to fire-based attacks. Plus 25% cost reduction to all fire-based skills and abilities. Creates passive skill, Fire Absorption. Magic, Fireball is available. Magic, Flamethrower is available. Magic, Fire Cloak is available. Magic, Fire Shield is available. Magic, Fire Rain is available, locked. Magic, Fire Lance is available, locked. Magic, Fire Wave is available, locked. Magic, Firestorm is available, locked. Just wearing the gloves unlocked a full list of fire magic. The gloves were identical except for the other glove granting plus 50 dexterity. Tord had seen through him, long before he himself had made the decision to focus on his fire abilities. These gloves were the best he could have wished for. The inside lining was a soft red leather, covered in thin golden fabric made from the celestial bronze. On top of the fabric were plates made from soft-looking but very tough scales. The description was true. Despite looking quite brutal and heavy, they felt very comfortable to wear and did not hinder any range of movements. He felt the knowledge of the skills come to his mind. It was his first time learning magic aside from lifestyle magic. He also understood why some of the spells were locked. It simply lacked the required level and intelligence to use these. Fire Absorption was also a very interesting skill. Skill Fire Absorption, passive, no cost. Allows the user to absorb fire and heat to heal himself and replenish mana. Unfortunately, this did not work with the fire he made with his own skills. It might have been too easy otherwise. If this was Nadal's part of the package, what was Tord's then? In the box was a big wooden chest with another letter. This was Tord's letter. Hi, Seth. I'm sorry for only answering so late, but I wanted to investigate things and give you a satisfying answer, before writing back to you. Despite being clearly labeled as not cursed, the leather being cursed is a serious matter, and I'm sorry to have endangered you like this. Although you shouldn't have taken it in the first place, I'm glad you are okay. Your friend Nadal approached me sometime after you left and asked for your glove size. He's a great craftsman and we worked together to make a new pair of gloves for you. They are also a small apology for what happened, and I hope you like them. He also helped me to find the culprit. It was actually quite funny.